All right. I believe we are live right now, November 4th, 2024. I got some interesting news today. Got some stuff here to go over before we get into the House of Commons proceedings and then obviously question period. A little podcast here known as Village Media has been doing some interviews with Trudeau, and I just find it more and more interesting that Trudeau has this overwhelming confidence. He's incredibly confident that the next election is going to be in his favor. I don't know where this confidence is coming from, but it continues to be put into the light here. So let's take a look.
Because politics is so much about feeling, and I remember when you were first elected, there was that feeling around the hockey rinks where I went that most people were going to vote Justin Trudeau's government. It's a different sense now. At the hockey rink and around the community, you hear people saying, Poilievre's going to get my vote.
Were they saying that? They weren't necessarily saying they were voting for me 6 months before the election, though. Mm-hmm. Like through the first half of the 2015, and I always worry about going too much. Oh well, 2015 we did it.
Yes.
But through the entire first half of the 2015 election, we were way behind in the polls. So there wasn't anything automatic or inevitable or even felt on the ground until the last few weeks of the campaign. So Canadians tend to make up their minds later. Right now, absolutely. There's a huge level of frustration that is, a lot of it's pointed at me. A lot of it is directed at me through very clever use of social media and attack ads that we haven't yet responded to. But to prejudge the outcome of an election already is something that I don't think people would be too wise in doing.
It's a fair point.
Well, I would also like to point out that you've had your run here. You've done your thing, Justin, for almost a decade, and a lot of people are fed up with it. And it is showing that people are fed up with it across the board. No matter what issue people want to debate or talk about, it always comes back and the finger always gets pointed back directly at your government, because everything that has happened to this point, everything that has led up to this point is pretty much your fault. There's no other way around it. And I find it funny that he still has this confidence. He still has this idea that no matter what's going to happen, he still has a chance here. And yeah, I'm sure there's going to be people that want to vote for him still. I don't know why, but there will be that group of people, most likely in the liberal college campuses and university campuses and the big cities like Toronto. But I don't know where this confidence is coming from.
Minister, there's no question that there's some people who just quite simply aren't in your corner and want to see some change. And that's fair, right? That's democracy. That's their right. But what I think is different here is there seems to be a segment of people who have taken it to a whole new level. It's now pretty common that we see bumper stickers and flags that say F Trudeau. I don't ever remember seeing an F Harper flag or an F Chrétien flag. This to me isn't politics. This is personal. You must have seen them. It has to bother you.
My first thought, and you pointed out well, what has happened over the past years that has brought people to that place of that much anger? Canadian politics and Canadians in general used to be a little more civil around disagreements like that. One of the things we've seen with the phenomenon of amplification of extremist right-wing voices, of
extremist right-wing voices. Okay, hold on. So the apathy towards you, Justin, has gotten to this level simply due to the policies you've put into place, simply because the way you have treated individuals, whether it is from the Freedom Convoy, people in your own caucus, your own government, people across the government side, whether it's Conservative, NDP, Bloc, whatever. All over Canada, even internationally, people look at you as a weak joke of a man, a weak leader, somebody who is no longer fit and realistically was never fit to be the leader. You want to go back to 2015, whenever that election happened, a lot of people were voting Trudeau in simply based off of his looks. He was a younger guy. He was handsome. He had a nice haircut. These were ads that they ran back in the day to try and demonize him and try to say to people, well, simply don't vote for him based off of his looks. But here we are 10 years later. It has gotten to this point. People no longer want you in power. Your own Liberal Party members do not want you in power. Now that's debatable. That's a slippery slope, because if they really didn't want him in power, they would have walked across. They would have left the Liberal government by now. But most of them are slime bags who just want their pension. I just once again find it very funny that he has this overwhelming confidence. He believes, like he said, 6 months before the last election, we weren't tracking very good. He's saying the exact same thing. He thinks the exact same thing is going to happen here. I don't know where this confidence is coming from, but it's very interesting. Let's get back into this.
Misinformation, disinformation online is... No, there's always been those people who have, really aggressive negative views. What we've seen is the amplification of that, the taking up space of more and more of that, the organizing, so you get 3 people with flags outside any little community event I do, that makes it much more visible. But I don't think Canadians have actually changed for the most part. I mean, yes, people tend to give folks the benefit of the doubt. If someone's out there
and I think we have given you the benefit of the doubt for too long. Canadians who have voted you in time and time again have given you that benefit of the doubt 3 times, Justin. And I think your time is up. And if for some reason, somehow, you get voted back into power, you get voted back into office, then clearly, I don't know what the hell is going on here. Maybe we're the ones out of touch if Trudeau gets voted back into office. But let's hope he doesn't.
In the rain, waving an F Trudeau flag, people are going to say, boy, the Prime Minister must have done really something terrible to upset that person, because we're good people. We sort of say, okay, there must be a reason for you to do that.
It seems un-Canadian.
It seems un-Canadian to not give people...
To express yourself, to be an individual, to stand up against the government and not be one of the sheep just drinking the slop, Justin. It's very interesting how he demonizes people like that and calls them far right-wing extremists. And if you're not on the left, then you are a far right-wing extremist. It's interesting how they think that way.
The benefit of the doubt. The problem is right now that there's a silent majority that is a little bit silent and maybe wondering whether it's actually a minority. And you got a lot of good, thoughtful people who are saying, I don't have anything personal against the leader, but everyone seems to hate him because I see all these flags, and therefore, he must be on his way out, or he must be unpopular. And it's sort of a self-feeding, particularly in both the media cycles and specifically the social media cycles that we're in, that amplifies itself. And what I am continually reminded of when I have real conversations with people, whether it's in a lunchroom at a plant, or whether it's mainstreaming down a small town, or sitting in a university classroom in the middle of a big city, is people are thoughtful, people are interested, and people are open to having real discussions about the challenges we're facing.
I know your dad.
Okay, so we're going to move on to the next thing here. That was just a little bit of this podcast that popped up here. We have an interesting little Twitter video here from a Liberal MP talking about how 1 million Canadians have gotten their teeth cleaned. But the sad reality is over 2 million Canadians are lined up at food banks. Over 2 million Canadians are starving, including nearly 500 to 600,000 of those Canadians being children. So you could sit here boosting the numbers of, oh, look at all these people getting their teeth cleaned. But if you have no food to eat, are your teeth really that important?
Hey Siri, how do you say 1 million people in French?
In French, 1 billion people is 1 million de personnes.
1 million de personnes. That's how many Canadians have received dental care through the Canadian Dental Care Plan. we're committed to delivering even more for Canadians.
Listen to this music. They're just so incredibly out of touch. I can't imagine trying to run advertisements like this thinking you're doing something good. Holy fuck, man. Out of all the things going on right now, here's another thing going on. All of the foreign interference going on in our country right now, India being a massive part of it, Trudeau allowing pretty much whoever into the country as they please right now. Well, not right now, but a couple days ago, yesterday, and the day before, there is more or less, and I hate using this word because I'm not Tim Pool, but there is more or less a Indian civil war happening within Canada. Now, I know that sounds ridiculous right now, but you had Hindus fighting Khalistanis, and you also have the Sikh group. All of these different Indian religious groups going after each other within Canada. Stuff that would be happening over in India. Civil war type stuff there has now leaked over. I'm not going to play this entire video. Just going to run through it here. But the police are involved. Look at all the people here. It has leaked over into our country into ways that you think it shouldn't. You really think stuff like this shouldn't be happening. Now, obviously, people have the freedom to protest. They have the right to freedom of speech. But when it comes to stuff like this, man, it has clearly gotten way out of hand. You have people from multiple different sides that would be fighting over in India are now here in Canada doing the exact same thing. They are attacking temple goers. They are harassing individuals. This kind of insanity has gotten way out of hand. Way out of hand. And this is simply due to the amount of people we're bringing in unchecked. We have people from all of these different activist organizations from India that are now attacking one another within our streets. Fucking crazy. Absolute insanity. Another thing I'd like to get into before we get into House of Commons here. I'm not going to play this video. This is a very big story going around right now. This might actually cause an uprising in the US. These two people here had a pet raccoon and a pet squirrel. New York officials raided their house, took them, and euthanized the squirrel and the raccoon. Now, the story behind it is the raccoon and the squirrel, I think, either were hit by cars or they were suffering or something like that, so they brought them in to nurture them, and they kept them as pets kind of thing. The whole point I'm going to make here, you have the government raiding these people's houses to kill their pets, but the government does absolutely nothing in New York to stop the rampant crime, the amount of illegal migrants running around through New York City causing all sorts of havoc. You have laws that are passed in some of these states where you could steal nearly $1,000 worth of stuff and not get arrested. But the government is going out of their way to euthanize a raccoon and a squirrel based on one single phone call that was made. One complaint was filed. And I don't know, I just find it interesting. The government goes out of their way to respond to this instantly. But with everything else going on in the United States, especially in New York, they turn a blind eye to it. This is a massive story. Pretty crazy stuff there. And one more thing. This is a lovely thing to kind of end on a somewhat high note here before we head in to question period and House of Commons. A fuck Trudeau chant broke out at UFC Edmonton in Rogers Place. Let's take a listen. You love to hear it. You love to hear it. If you are just joining right now, I want to thank you for joining. We are getting into House of Commons.
Subsequent to that time, a sub-amendment was moved.
I believe they are still talking about the SDTC, the over $400 million that has gone missing. Taxpayer money. This has been happening for over a month now. This debate, this scandal, this issue. And we're still stuck on it. What's up, Frosty? How's it going? What's up, Eric? What's up, Goldie? What's up, Drifter? What's up, Magic Moon? USA First, Miss Helith, Razor. How's everybody doing?
the cabinet responsible for governance. Okay, so that's what we're debating now, is actually the sub-amendment dealing with these two gentlemen. The thing that is striking about this is that the reference to the Privacy Commissioner points out that the Privacy Commissioner, unlike so many other
People are losing their minds over the squirrel and raccoon, and rightfully so. Yeah, man. It's actually, when you really think of it, the government is not taking action to do anything else. But this squirrel and raccoon, fuck, we gotta raid these people's houses, capture these animals, and euthanize them instantly, based off of one phone call. This is literally gonna cause an uprising a day before the election. And the funny thing is the media has tried to make this a right-wing issue. Typical mainstream media stuff, not calling it out for what it is. Absolute bullshit. The government went into these people's houses, captured their animals, and fucking murdered them. Simple as that, straight up. There's nothing else to it. This isn't a left-wing, a right-wing issue. This is a people versus government issue. And it's quite obvious that the government doesn't care. They're turning a blind eye, like I said, to everything else going on in the state of New York. But the squirrel and raccoon, we gotta jump on that issue right away. We gotta make sure that is solved right away.
On that list. Or more to the point, the Privacy Commissioner probably anticipated that we would...
What's up, Jen? Welcome. Welcome to the channel.
The law clerk and parliamentary counsel for the House of Commons are on that list of individuals who will testify before Procedure and House Affairs. That individual will be able to shed light on the kinds of documents, without getting into the specifics, the kinds of documents that have been presented, the kinds of information that they reveal, and can point out where it looks like the redactions have had the effect of removing evidence that really could not be characterized in any conceivable way as triggering the rights for which the Liberal members have such a punctilious concern. The Commissioner of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police would likewise be able to shed some light on that as well. So it's knowing that both the individual in receipt of the documents, who is not going to be called forward as a prosecution witness and therefore can look at them objectively and without any danger with regard to future proceedings, court proceedings, his testimony, and also the testimony of the Commissioner of the RCMP, who can indicate exactly what kinds of concerns they need to have. Those are very significant safeguards. Now, in all fairness, their names hadn't been added to the list back when the Privacy Commissioner submitted full unredacted documents, but presumably the Privacy Commissioner was able to anticipate, as an intelligent individual in his position would do, that this would be the case. That should be no surprise, because the Privacy Commissioner himself, his name is Philippe Dufresne. I'm going to quote from his biography on the Privacy Commissioner's website, quote, "He previously served as the law clerk and parliamentary counsel of the House of Commons. In this capacity, he was the chief legal officer of the House of Commons and led the office responsible for the provision of legal and legislative drafting services to the House of Commons, its Speaker, members and committees, the Board of Internal Economy, and the House Administration. Additionally, before that, he was the Canadian Human Rights Commission's Senior General Counsel. So if there's concerns about abstract human rights, procedural rights, which are some of the most important human rights, well, here's a guy who knows this stuff cold. Quote, "He successfully represented the Commission before all levels of Canadian courts, including the Supreme Court of Canada, in a number of key human rights and constitutional cases over the past 2 decades. He has appeared before the Supreme Court on 15 occasions on issues ranging from accessibility and equal pay for work of equal value to the balancing of human rights and national security," end quote. So the Privacy Commissioner has far more expertise in this subject than any of the Liberal MPs I've seen addressing this question, and he felt safe releasing unredacted documents, understanding that these safeguards would be in place. That is quite striking, quite different from most of the other government agents who responded. In all fairness, he is independent of government, unlike those departments which failed to submit, all of whom report to ministers from the same government whose MPs now say that we ought to accept that these redactions are in the public interest, although it seems more likely, frankly, on its face, that they are in the interests of those individuals who have something to hide in this matter, and who may have well have broken the law. Just a final note here, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner, the Commissioner, I assume, understands his mandate. Well, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner has a mandate to provide legal and policy analyses and expertise to help guide Parliament's review of evolving legislation, to respect individuals' rights to privacy. So someone whose job is to do that said it's okay to release unredacted documents, and demonstrated that through his own version of such documents. Also, his mandate is providing legal opinions and litigating court cases to advance the interpretation and application of federal privacy laws. Mr. Speaker, I think these are pretty strong pieces of evidence. The evidence we have from the initial report way back on June the 4th of the Auditor General indicates very strongly that there is something profoundly wrong. There's something profoundly wrong with this fund that dwarfs any previous scandal of a similar sort. The numbers involved are so enormous. The sponsorship scandal that took place when a similar kind of fund was set up to be dispersed with very little oversight, that involved conflicts of interest and misallocated funds on a scale that is perhaps, I think I may be overstating things, perhaps 10% of the amount involved here. It might have been less than 10%. The proportion of funds which seem to have been misallocated is in a neighborhood that is extraordinary as a proportion. The Auditor General selected randomly a subset of all the contracts and found that there were problems in a majority of those contracts, suggesting that the majority of the funds allocated may simply have gone to the wrong purposes entirely. Does this qualify as illegal use or merely as grotesquely inappropriate use, which is not illegal thanks to rules that are so slipshod, so loosely written that it's almost impossible to fall afoul of them? That's a good question. I don't know. Probably a little of each. But there's clearly a very profound problem here. We have some guidance as to why we can be reassured that these are reasonable. It is reasonable to seek full disclosure of all documentation. I simply am unable to determine what, other than a deliberate attempt at misdirection, lies behind all of the high-sounding assertions regarding procedural justice that keep on being mentioned by Liberal members when they urge us to be afraid of the implications of this very reasonable set of motions, amendments, and sub-amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments, the Honourable Parliament.
Questions and comments. Okay, before we get into that, this happened on the weekend. This was something interesting that I covered in a video. Thought I'd cover it again very briefly. Looks like a Breaking Bad scene. Cops on Canadian sick drug super lab. Check this shit out, man. During the raids, officers seized 54 kilos of fentanyl, 390 kilos of methamphetamine, 35 kilos of cocaine, 15 of MDMA, and 6 of cannabis. They also seized nearly 100 firearms. This shit is intense. Look how elaborate these setups are. The RCMP believes that organized crime groups were behind the mass production and international distribution of fentanyl meth orchestrated through the drug lab in Falkland, BC. Crazy stuff right here, man. They literally have bulletproof vests and an arsenal to arm a small militia. Crazy, crazy stuff. Let's get back to the CPAC.
Stop this multi-million-dollar abuse of power, and let's start moving on so we can start dealing with the issues of Canadians. When will this member in particular, Mr. Speaker, advise his leader to do the right thing, stop the abuse, and while he's doing that, get the security clearance?
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
I think I got the numbers right. 93 members of Parliament. Thanks. 93 Conservative members of Parliament. So I'll just ask the question. I'm not sure how this is costing money. We aren't paid by the word here.
It is just the tip of the iceberg, Norman, and that's the crazy part about all of it. We're never going to get any deeper than just the tip.
Observe that if that's how things work, if it's the
And that sounded really weird now that I said that out loud.
public's money being squandered, then surely the member opposite who has taken up more time and used up more of the House's word count than anybody else in this Parliament owes us all an apology and should let somebody else speak for a change. You know, the fact that he's up there talking all the time while that entire caucus is gagged. It's him and the member for Kingston and the Islands, and everybody else is told to shut up and sit down. And it's no wonder their caucus is so upset with their leader. What abuse, what abuse of a caucus, what abuse of people who have the right under our parliamentary traditions to speak out freely. Well, none of that goes on. They can't even open their mouths. I'm told they can't even get up in their caucus to ask a question without submitting a request first. I can tell you in our caucus, which I chair, that does not happen.
That's right. Questions and comments, and the honourable member, New Westminster, Burnaby.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate the member. I've served with him for a number of years, and always appreciate his speeches. Of course, as you know, Mr. Speaker, the NDP supports the motion, and it was NDP MPs that got to the bottom of the wheat charity scandal and also got to the bottom of the SNC-Lavalin scandal. That's where New Democrats shine. We tried to do the same thing under the Harper regime, and the member will remember how Conservatives shut down any parliamentary inquiry into the myriad scandals of the Harper years. The ETS scandal was $400 million. The G8 scandal was $1 billion, and that included gazebos, as you'll remember, Mr. Speaker. Phoenix Pay scandal, $2.2 billion. The anti-terrorism funding, where they simply lost the paper trail, $3.1 billion. Now, the member was here. He remembers how the Harper regime shut everything down. Does he now appreciate that that was wrong? And does he apologize on behalf of Conservatives for their years of scandals and corruption?
Excellent question. Member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I likewise very much enjoy my my colleagues' interventions. In particular, I enjoyed them much more than the ones for the member from Winnipeg North Centre, if we're being honest about things. Although I don't get to enjoy them as frequently. But I do want to say, with regard to this, I was intimately involved in the Procedure and House Affairs hearings in 2011 into the purported contempt of Parliament of the then government, the then minority government headed by Stephen Harper. And there were a series of charges that were made against the government. One had to do with the procurement of jets. Another one had to do with an imaginary plan to set up for-profit prisons. This was the issue on which a vote of non-confidence was held. And it endorsed the report of a committee that never actually finished reporting. I know this because I was sitting in that committee debating the content of an eventual report when the bells rang, ending our debates, so that the vote could be held, concurring in the report we had not actually finished writing. So I think that's what he's referring to. I'll just tell you, Mr. Speaker, that ultimately, as the member from Winnipeg North Centre likes to point out, the government was found in contempt. What he doesn't mention is that in the subsequent election, they were elected with a majority, and his party was reduced to its lowest numbers since Confederation.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Edmonton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my friend from Winnipeg North, even though he doesn't have a floor, finds the need to continue to speak, but I'll get on to it. One of the issues with the Green Slush Fund, the SDTC, is the government will not turn over the documents Parliament has demanded. One of the things we're looking for, and we've asked for repeatedly, in the contribution agreement between this government and Industry Canada and funding the SDTC, the foundation, it states in the contribution agreement that any conflicts of interest, real or perceived, over the funding have to be reported to the minister. There's well over 150 conflicts that we know of, as pointed out by the Auditor General. We've asked repeatedly, even the head of SDTC, were any of these conflicts reported to the minister? And all we've received back has been shrugs. We actually brought in the old minister, Navdeep Bains, into committee, and we're actually looking at a privilege issue because he's refusing to answer the questions. Well, these documents that Parliament's demanded, if they're turned over, will we actually get the answer of whether Liberal ministers were informed, as they're required to under the agreement, of these conflicts of interest?
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
That's a good question. I mean, there's really two ways of slicing this. The implication is that these conflicts were reported to the ministers. The minister saw them and decided not to act, which is itself obviously outrageous. The other possibility, which I think is entirely possible, remembering always the dictum that one ought never to ascribe to malice that which can be explained by incompetence, and looking at the record of this government, is that it may very well be that, like the Prime Minister, the relevant minister simply never actually looked at his briefing book.
Questions and comments? Question et commentaire. The honourable member for Calgary, Rocky Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad I caught your eye in time there. I wonder if the member might spend a moment on talking about remedies for those that think that this House should merely move on to other business. I don't care for the government bills that are potentially going to be debated, but some would say that we must get on to other business. However, the remedy for what one might think of as paralysis in the House would be to dissolve the House and go straight to an election and let Canadians pronounce on what agenda should be pursued in this House of Commons. Does he have any comments on that as a specific remedy to the impasse if the government is unwilling to fulfill its obligation and table the documents?
The honourable member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Well, of course, my colleague is quite right. We could, and we probably should go to an election. You know, the House of Commons has a kind of tenuous confidence in the government right now, so it would seem. Confidence that should be understood as used in the parliamentary sense does not mean robust confidence. It means is unwilling to trigger an election. Certainly in this party, we're willing to go to an election. We would very much like to do so. My sense is that there's a willingness in the bloc. The NDP is wavering and hopes they'll see the light. But yes, in terms of where Canadians are, it is abundantly clear. There has never been a Prime Minister, to my knowledge, well, but there hasn't been a Prime Minister since polling started, who has been as unpopular as the current Prime Minister is, who is opposed by more people. And the people of Canada, I think they deserve to have a say, regardless of what our rules are here. We can all agree that morally that ought to happen. I'm not suggesting that somehow we should override what the rules are on the Confidence Convention, but clearly it is well past time for this Prime Minister and his tired party of incompetent ministers to move aside.
Reprise du débat, continuing debate. The honourable member for Souris, Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's good to see you here today. I'm happy to have a chance to contribute today, taking part in this discussion. It is always an honor for me to stand and speak on behalf of the great people of Souris Moose Mountain. If I might, I would like to take a quick moment to give a shout out to my 5-year-old granddaughter, Zella, who is beautiful and brilliant, just like her mother, Catherine, my daughter, and her grandmother, Donna, my wife. I'd also like to shout out for my 2-year-old grandson, Porter, and my 16-month-old twins grandsons, Kason and Atlas. Mr. Speaker, the reason I bring that up is that not only are these people very important to me, but these particular children, like all children in Canada, are the main reason why I do what I do. I love them with all my heart. However, I worry about their financial futures after 9 years of this government's reckless spending. The Liberal Green Slush Fund that we are talking about here today is a prime example of just that. As I stated, I appreciate this opportunity to add my voice to the debate that we're having here in this House today, and which we are already been having for a number of weeks. I have listened to many speeches delivered by my colleagues on this issue, and I admire the perseverance that has been shown to making sure that this government is held accountable for their failure to produce the documents that were ordered by this House. It is shameful we aren't able to move on to other business simply because the Liberals refuse to follow the rules. But this is also something we have sadly come to expect after the last 9 years of this Prime Minister. One of my colleagues tallied up the number of scandals that have occurred under this government, and he came up with approximately 68, an alarming number to say the least. If we look at it in another way, that means that these Liberals are dealing with a new scandal about every 2 months. Some, like myself, might wonder how this is even possible, especially since the Liberals got into power by claiming to be the most transparent and accountable party out there. Now, Mr. Speaker,
that's
Spanish
a good
philosopher George Santayana is
Wow.
attributed for
Did they
saying,
actually say that about
those who
themselves?
cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. I find it very ironic given today's discussion. In fact, in October 2013, the Prime Minister himself tweeted 6 months after becoming the leader of the Liberals that, and I quote, "It's hard not to feel disappointed in your government when every day there is a new scandal," end quote. What does this say about this Prime Minister? Scandal after scandal after scandal. We on this side of the House have been dealing with this exact problem for nearly a decade now. And in this particular instance, it's costing the taxpayer an eye-watering $400 million. This is not the kind of governance that I wanted for my country, and I know that the majority of Canadians are also sick and tired of the Liberals' repeated failures and complete inability to manage public funds. I'd like to remind all members that the seats that we are sitting in do not belong to us. They belong to the people, the taxpayers, who put their faith in us to represent their best interests and to make their lives better in whatever way we can. The people voted for us because they trusted our ability to govern honestly and openly, and that's something that I personally hold very sacred. Watching the Liberals flout the rules of this institution by refusing to comply with the House order to produce documents is offensive, not just to me, but to all Canadians. It is a slap in the face of democracy, and it insults the very people who put MPs in this position of privilege, here in this House of Commons chamber in the very first place. Mr. Speaker, the overarching theme that appears to encompass this Prime Minister's time in office over the last 9 years is rules for thee, but not for me. What the public sees with this government is hypocrisy at every turn. How are Canadians meant to trust a government when its leaders continually says one thing but does another? Prime Minister tells Canadians they need to cut down their emissions. And what does he do? He flies
Hops on
in
a jumbo
private
jet,
taking dozens of trips a month, and likely has one of the largest carbon footprints of anyone in this country. The Prime Minister said the budget will balance itself, yet it has now spent more than the past 9 years than all other previous Prime Ministers combined. The Prime Minister said that he would maintain an open and transparent government when he got elected, yet the second the We Charity scandal hit the headlines, he prorogued Parliament to avoid accountability. Time and time again, the Liberals fail to practice what they've preached, and they refuse to be held accountable for these failings. The fact of the matter is that the rules of this place and now its functions are written out in black and white.
let's take a peek at that.
I believe all MPs have a copy of Bosch and Gagne's practice and procedures in their office, and this information is also available on the internet. We can all access it on our computers or on our phones, so there's really no reason why these procedures wouldn't and couldn't be followed when they are so clear and readily available. When it comes to the right to order for the production of documents, Bosch and Gagnon, 3rd edition, 2017, states the following on pages 984 to 986. The standing orders do not delimit the power to order the production of papers and records. The result is a broad, absolute power that on the surface appears to be without restriction. There is no limit on the types of papers likely to be requested. The only prerequisite is that the papers exist in hard copy or electronic format and that they are located in Canada. It continues on to say, no statute or practice diminishes the fullness of that power rooted in House privileges unless there is an explicit legal provision to that effect, or unless the House adopts a specific resolution limiting the power. The House has never set a limit on this power to order the production of papers and records." End quote. This is not the first time that this section of the Practice and Procedures Manual has been quoted during this particular debate. And that's because it's so essential to how our country's government functions, or doesn't function in this case. The House of Commons has, without question, the right to order papers to be produced by the government, and it has done so in the appropriate way, by following the appropriate rules. The Liberals have failed to do their jobs and have broken those rules, yet again showcasing their disregard for the institution of Parliament and eroding public trust at the same time. Mr. Speaker, one of the roles that have been very fortunate to have had during my time as Member of Parliament was to be the chair of the Standing Committee of Government Operations and Estimates, otherwise known as OGO. I took that job very seriously because I knew that there was great trust being put in me to uphold the rules and to follow the procedures that have been set out and established by my predecessors and my followers. This was the job I was given, and I like to think that I did it well and to the best of my ability. It wasn't difficult for me to follow the rules, Mr. Speaker. I had some incredible support from the House of Commons committee staff, including the clerk and the analysts, so there was no reason why I was unable to follow the letter of the law with their help and guidance. We have the same support here in the House of Commons, and I thank all the clerks and all the experts in this place who work so hard to make sure we can do our jobs properly for Canadians. With all of these great minds coming together, as well as the ease of access to how now with the technology that we have, one would think that it would be easy to know and comply with the rules of Parliament. Yet the Liberals still can't seem to figure it out. Canadians expect that at the very least, their elected officials are the type of people who follow the rules and respect the institution of Parliament. This is why they elected us, and upholding these rules and institutions is one of the most basic functions of this role. What Canadians don't want to see are members of the Parliament who are stalling the business of this country because they are desperately trying to cover up their $400 million scandal. But that's exactly what's happening when they turn into CPAC these days. It's a disappointing yet not surprising that the Liberals are doing anything they can to dodge accountability for their mistakes. Mr. Speaker, what must be in these documents that they do not want Canadians to see? Begs to make us wonder. Mr. Speaker, as you know, Sustainable Development Technology Canada, also known as SDTC, is the organization that has been the center of our debate since September. The initial purpose of SDTC...
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Nothing does get done. They've been debating this for over a month now. This $400 million scandal, over $400 million of taxpayer money that's gone disappearing under the Liberal government. They've done absolutely nothing. The Liberals have handed over documents. Everything on those documents more or less was redacted, and they're still running around in circles playing these games.
As someone who represents a riding that has been a world leader in developing the utilization of carbon capture and sequestration technology, otherwise known as CCUS, I know firsthand how important it is to ensure that the funding that is meant for this purpose goes to the right people and the right places. Thanks to investments made by the previous Conservative government, the CCUS facility at Boundary Dam Power Plant in my hometown of Estevan, Saskatchewan, has now been in operation for 10 years. As of the end of 2023, this facility has captured a total of over 5.8 million tons of CO2 since 2014 and prevented it from entering our atmosphere and sequestered it 2 kilometers underground. This is exactly the kind of project that SDTC was meant to facilitate. And it is clear that when taxpayers' funds are handled by a competent government, it creates an environment where innovation and development can flourish. We've seen it before, and under the next Conservative government, I know we will see it again. Sadly, the reason why we are having this debate today is because taxpayer funds at SDTC were abused to the tune of that whopping $400 million, not a penny of which has been paid back. Money was given by directors to companies that they had huge conflicts of interest with, companies that they were affiliated and stood to gain from. Mr. Speaker, I come from a rural riding that has historically relied on the development of this country's abundant natural resources. The biggest industries in my constituency are agriculture and energy. And I can tell you right now that farmers are some of the best, most educated environmentalists and stewards of the land that you'll ever encounter. The innovation and ideas that our agriculture producers have had and continue to have to reduce emissions, improve soil quality, and so much more, all while producing some of the best crops in the world, is astounding. I can only imagine what these producers could have done with the $400 million that this government misappropriated through SDTC. And they should be ashamed of themselves by trying to cover up such a gross and egregious misuse of taxpayers' dollars. Mr. Speaker, where did that money go? And in whose pockets? One might ask that question. Now, I would like to focus on that figure for a moment, because I think that the amount of $400 million is difficult for the average person to really visualize. In times past, families, governments would count their nickels and dimes, and over time, that was turned into dollars and cents, and then into hundreds and thousands, and then into millions and billions. And now it will, if we look at the national debt, with this government, we are counting trillions, with families are still trying to keep up with the nickels and dimes. The Liberals have upped the ante in all of the worst ways. Too much scandal coupled with too much spending, and Canadians have had enough. When this Liberal leader became Prime Minister, the national debt was just over $612 billion. And today, 9 years later, it has doubled to over $1.2 trillion. As mentioned, he has spent more in this time frame than all other previous prime ministers combined. As I stated before, I can only imagine the difference that $400 million would have made to the people in my riding if that money had been spent responsibly and constructively instead of being used for our Liberal Green slush fund. I know the town of Cornack, which has been absolutely devastated by this government's so-called just transition, would have benefited massively with just a small chunk of that money. They stand to lose up to 67% of the town's population by 2030 because this government's policies and lack of support over the last 9 years. Their local representatives have pleaded with the Liberals for more funding and more boots-on-the-ground assistance, but they have been virtually getting nothing. They have even come all the way to Ottawa on multiple occasions to state their case before this government and the other House about the need for greater support from their government. Instead of getting funding that might save their country, what do the people of Cornack see? They see rich Liberals getting even richer through corrupt and illegal means. They see a government that refuses to be accountable to the people who elected it. They see $400 million going to people who did nothing to earn it but to rub shoulders with the right people in the right places. The system was blatantly abused, and the attempt to cover up this abuse by refusing to produce the ordered documents is almost just as bad. Mr. Speaker, according to the Auditor General's report, there were 186 conflicts of interest in the grants that were delivered by SDTC, amounting to roughly $334 million that was given to projects in which board members of SDTC had a conflict of interest. And for those following at home, such that the numbers add up, there was $58 million given to projects where their terms were not even insured. These board members, I will remind you, were appointed by the Prime Minister and by Mr. Baines, the then Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry. They handpicked these individuals and approved them for this job. These board members then felt it was appropriate to make funding decisions that benefited.
If you guys are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. I do cover House of Commons proceedings and question period whenever it is live. Thank you for joining.
Mr. Speaker, since I became an MP in 2015, one of my biggest gripes with this government is their unwavering devotion to creating unnecessary bureaucracy. Unfortunately, this Prime Minister seems to love nothing more than hiring a board of people to consult on every issue under the sun. And he has no problem whatsoever with billing the taxpayer for it. The Liberals create these boards and they pay the members to consult, hold meetings, write reports, and in many cases there is almost no concrete benefit to show for it, and little to no accountability for these board members. These people are paid with taxpayers' dollars. By the taxpayer, I mean the hardworking Canadians who go out to do a job and get paid for their work. These people then pay taxes on that income.
Yes,
that is how
correct.
Governments make money. This government likes to take the money from them to pay bureaucracies rather than by using it to benefit the very people who work for it. My worry is this: if the board of SDTC was able to waste and abuse $400 million of taxpayer dollars so flippantly, how many other boards appointed by this government are doing the same? Are we just starting to scratch the surface, or only just beginning to really see the tip of the iceberg when it comes to how deep this scandal might truly run? And as we know, an iceberg is always bigger under the water than what is seen on the surface. Oftentimes, the cover-up is worse than the crime.
That is also correct.
But in this case, the Liberals won't even give the authorities the chance to determine how bad the crime really is. We know it's bad. The famous Liberal sponsorship scandal that brought down the government of the time was about $40 million. And this is 10 times that amount. As I mentioned before, it is a number so high that most struggle to really conceptualize it, including myself. Mr. Speaker, the $400 million scandal we are debating here today is not the Prime Minister's first. Far from it. In fact, I am sure that we all remember the We Charity scandal, which was a whopping $600 million that the Prime Minister gave to his friends and Liberal insiders. We obviously didn't learn his lesson then, and we're likely he won't learn anything from this situation either. We also had the ArriveCan app, otherwise known as Arrive Scam, since it cost the taxpayers $56 million for something that could have been created for a few $1,000s. I'm sure my constituents who can't afford groceries would have loved a piece of that wasted $56 million, but I digress.
I know I would like some that $56 million.
Where the Prime Minister unethically and inappropriately interfered with our country's justice system by pressuring one of the cabinet ministers to do something against her greater judgment. That's a prime example of how he has absolutely zero regard for the rule of law of this country, and shows that he truly does not believe that he can do whatever, or believes that he can do whatever he wants without consequences. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, I'd like to wrap up my remarks by reminding my colleagues that Remembrance Day is soon approaching. As the son of a veteran, as someone who was raised to have the utmost respect for the men and women who have fought for this country, we need a government that does better. Our veterans fought for you and I to be able to live peacefully and safely in this country that upholds the rule of law above all else. And the least we can do as parliamentarians is reflect that value here in this House. I call on the Prime Minister and his Liberals to stop the cover-up, produce the documents so that we can get back to work that truly matters. Or better yet, just call a carbon tax election.
Great speech.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary of the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. It is very important that we all recognize that what we're witnessing is in fact nothing more than a Conservative Party tactic that's being directed by the leader of the Conservative Party. We have now seen 95 members of the Conservative Party stand up to filibuster an amendment to a motion that they actually introduced to the House, and all we want to see is for the Conservative Party to stop the multi-million-dollar filibuster, start putting Canadians' interests ahead of their own leadership issues, Madam Speaker, or ambitions, I should say, and the interests of Canadians above the Conservative Party of Canada. It's disrespectful. It's a continuation of the contempt of Parliament that Stephen Harper was in when the current leader was his parliamentary secretary, and we get a parliament, and now we get the leader of the Conservative Party abusing power here on the floor of the House of Commons, even when he's the leader of the opposition. My question to the member is, how can we expect the leader of the opposition not to control himself in terms of his abusive ways, which we've witnessed in the past and are seeing again today?
The honourable member for Brandon, Souris Moose Mountain, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member from Winnipeg North for his questions. It's apparent, it's good to see that there's at least one Liberal over there who knows how to add, because 94 plus 1 makes 95. So that's good to see that happens. But what I do question is, I really do question who, when we see him up all the time, and yet we don't have questions from anybody else other than that said member, that we are continually talking about 95 of us when where are the 150 of them? So the reality is, though, what my constituents continually tell me to his question is they don't ask me about what the member keeps talking about. They ask me, where's that money gone? Where did that $400 million get spent? Why are we not getting it back?
Because it's gone forever and we're never going to see it again, Robert. That's why.
Madam Speaker, and the NDP supports the motion. We want to get to the bottom of this latest Liberal scandal, as we did with We Charity and with the SNC Lavalin scandal. But the reality is, Madam Speaker, my colleague, who I have a lot of respect for, talked about where's the money gone? And this is a question that the Canadians have been asking since the Harper regime was in place. Because the Harper Conservatives absolutely steadfastly blocked any possibility of finding out what happened.
As awful as the scandal is, and as badly as Canadians are getting bent over because of this scandal, the over $400 million of taxpayer money is long gone, and they're fighting to try and figure out where it went. They want the documents to figure out exactly what the Liberals are hiding. We're not getting anywhere with this. Like I said, this has been going on for over a month now, and it's just become part of the circus, and it's very sad. It's actually sad. Canadians continue to get shafted, and they just continue to play games.
Apologized for that misspending and that corruption.
The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. Over the years, in my 9 years that I've been here, I've watched the member here in the House, and he brings a lot of experience because he was here before my time. And the Harper era was before my time. And so he's asking me to respond on questions that I wasn't here for. However, with that said, it's been 10 years almost, Madam Speaker, 10 years that this NDP Liberal government has been here. The only reason why this Liberal government has been here for the last 5 years is because they've been propped up by the NDP. If it wasn't for the NDP standing up and supporting them, this House would have fallen a long time ago, and we would have been in that carbon tax election. But continually, we are never given that opportunity. Why? Because the NDP continually wants to support, even though they love to say to the media, oh, we've torn up the document, when, guess what? When the votes come, who do they vote for? They vote for these Liberals.
Questions and comments? The honourable member for Calgary, Nose Hill.
Colleague talked about being the son of a veteran. I think at this time of year, we should reflect upon a line in a poem written over 100 years ago by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw the torch. Be yours to hold it high. And I often think about that line, and I think the foe lives in people who seek to subjugate or to divide or to prevent us as Canadians from having the freedoms that are our birthright, that those men fought to protect. I'm wondering if my colleague opposite could talk about why it is so important for each of us, regardless of political stripe, to take up that quarrel with the foe and what that means to him.
The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my friend and colleague from Calgary Nose Hill for a great question, especially at this important point of time. it is very humbling for me to be here in this House, because the privileges that I have today are thanks to so many Canadian veterans. And those privileges are what I believe in. Those privileges that I have here, as I mentioned in my speech, that this seat doesn't belong to me. It belongs to my constituents. And the people that we will be remembering in a couple of days will be those who gave us that right to sit here and to speak, to sit here and represent our constituents, because this is their seat. I am here just to be the voice for those people. We are all just here to be the voice for those people. And we need to continue to be the voice for those people, and those people who come on after them and will continue on for.
But you guys are failing to be the voice for those people. That's why we have things like foreign interference in our country. That's why we have these scandals, one after another, happening. Nothing is happening in our parliament that is moving forward. They continue to sit here, point the fingers, push the blame, gaslight. They refuse to actually address the problems. They refuse to actually take the necessary steps forward. I cannot sit here and listen to them say they're for Canadians while they continue to play this game, while millions, if not billions of dollars have gone missing under their watch. This is just pathetic at this point. It truly is.
Leader in the House of Commons, the Greens, the Blocs, the NDP, the Liberals, we all have it. But the leader of the Conservative Party has chosen not to get it. Does he believe Canadians have a right to know why not?
The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain.
Madam Speaker. Squirrel! Did someone see that squirrel that just ran through here? Because that's what these Liberals love to do, Madam Speaker. They love to scream the squirrel so you look at something else as opposed to paying attention to what's been going on. That's what they want. They just want to distract Canadians. So that they can say, oh, we can talk about something else as about talking about the $400 million that they handed out to their friends. People drive by on the highway, or driving on the highway, and they'll go, oh, there's nothing to see here, keep going, keep going. And that's what they're all doing here. Nothing to see here, just keep going, we're doing just fine. $400 million. And the government wants to tell Canadians, don't look this way, don't worry about it, it's only $400 million, because it's only million. It's not billion, it's not trillion. $400 million, Madam Speaker.
For a brief question, the honourable member for Provencher. Sorry, he's been trying to get up for some time.
My friend from Souris Cross River for his excellent speech. At the beginning of his speech, he talked about his grandchildren and how important it was that he was here to secure their future. And could he elaborate a little bit more on why it's important to illuminate the corruption of its Liberal government and what it will mean for future generations?
The honourable member for Souris Moose Mountain has 50 seconds to respond.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for that great question. And thank you again for allowing me to highlight my grandchildren, because they are the most important part of my life, other than my wife. And I need to put that on record. So I have witnesses. So, but Madam Speaker, that is what's so important here. We need to remember, who's paying that debt? Who's going to end up paying this $400 million, which is going to be added to the $1.2 trillion that's already being accumulated by this government? When you talk 1.2, Canadians trying to turn around and say, well, it's only 0.2. But when I point out to them, that 0.2 is $200 billion. Who's going to pay that? It's going to be my grandchildren. It's going to be your grandchildren. It's going to be everyone's grandchildren, and then some who are going to have to pay that.
Resuming debate, the honourable member Thornhill.
Speaker, what a tough act to follow with my colleague with those brilliant words and accountability for this government. But it has been nearly, or actually it's been a month. It's been a month that this House of Commons remains at a standstill, and the Prime Minister and these NDP Liberals will stop at nothing to throw sand in the gears of Parliament in a blatant attempt to cover up their costly corruption. These documents are still missing. The taxpayer money is still gone. The dirty deeds still go unpunished. It's been more than a month. And when you look at the numbers, it's astounding. $400 million vanished. 186 conflicts of interest, one government in contempt of Parliament. They refuse to hand over the evidence to the RCMP, and that's exactly why we are here. They don't want Canadians to know who got the money and how. They don't want Canadians to know how badly they've mismanaged this boondoggle. They don't want the RCMP to start sniffing around on what's actually going on.
The hell's
that
a
just tells us
boondoggle?
that whatever is in those documents must be really, really bad. It must be more than your usual garden variety liberal corruption. If you shut down Parliament for a month, there must be something brutal in those documents. And I think Canadians have a right to know. That's why we're still here. Day in and day out, parties in this House are demanding that the Liberals do their basic duty and provide transparency that Canadians deserve, and frankly, the Speaker demanded. And while they stand up claiming that government is working in the best interest of Canadians, as that's what their objective is, it's a bit rich from a party that has now stopped this place from operating for a month. The paper trail must be so long and lead all the way to the top. That's the only conclusion to draw from why they've stopped this place from working for a month. Nearly 10 years ago, the Prime Minister pledged that he would lead, quote, the most transparent and open government in the world. Those were his words. 10 years later, it's easy to see just how far they've fallen. And his caucus are now set to do, or are now forced to do the dirty work to cover up yet another scandal from this government. If stonewalling documents about corruption for months on end is the behavior of the world's most transparent government, then I'd hate to see what happens in the world's least transparent government. If the Prime Minister wanted to make the promise about transparency, then maybe he should have said that he would lead the most transparently corrupt and incompetent government. That would be a promise that he can certainly brag about keeping. That would result in us not having to be here certainly for a month, arguing with them about their basic duty to turn over the documents to the cops. But Conservatives have a plan, and they have a plan on keeping a promise too. And that's our promise to hold this government accountable for every bad decision that they make, for every grifter that gets rich off of Canadian tax dollars, and for every ethical lapse in judgment from this Prime Minister and the cabal of Liberals that have been a problem in that respect. And every conflict of interest, that is the duty of the opposition, and that is one that we take seriously, and that is one that we will argue here in this place for as long as it takes for these guys to actually be accountable to Canadians. We won't let up until we make sure that Canadians have the answer and that this doesn't happen again. But now it seems that with the culture of corruption, with the Liberal and the NDP parties, they've transferred over to another party. It seems like the Bloc wants in on the action too. They're offering the Prime Minister a secret deal to let him off the hook for this corruption and incompetence in order to serve the Bloc's narrow interest, a deal with the devil, so to speak, between them and the federal government to see all the corruption swept under the rug until the next scandal. And we know there will be another one. And to get a firmer grip on power and play politics with the rights and the privileges and the obligations of this place. When Canadians look at this Parliament, they see Liberals and Conservatives and NDP and Bloc and Green Party members. But now it's clear.
To be honest with you, I don't think they will ever be held accountable. They just released the names of 4 individuals that were involved in foreign interference, Mary Ng being one of them. And she still continues to sit in one of the many seats within the House of Commons. No questions, ifs, ands, or buts.
Canadian people.
It's very
more
strange.
Than that, unfettered confidence in his leadership. And only one party that is really standing up for Canadians. But after 9 years of this Prime Minister, Madam Speaker, the most devoted Liberals are realizing that the Prime Minister's corruption and incompetence are just too much to handle. At least 24 of them, at least 24 that we know of, have finally seen the light, demanding a change because the writing is on the wall. They feel
If you guys are new here, make sure you hit that like button, hit that sub button. I do cover House of Commons proceedings and question period whenever it is live. Thank you for joining.
Has become everything that he has become that he said that he wouldn't do. They see record high inflation and home prices. They see out of control government spending. They just see how out of reach life has become in Canada. They, like all of us, like almost every Canadian, have lost confidence in this Prime Minister. And really, Mr. Speaker, who can blame them? It's now evident that they'll do anything to stay in power. Even a humiliating U-turn that we saw last week on immigration when they set these sky-high targets and then had to reverse themselves. Even throwing around unfounded conspiratorial accusations like you just heard from questioning right before me, the leader of the opposition and foreign governments. The tinfoil hats over there must be real tight. Even turning the trite and frankly ridiculous fear-mongering about individual rights, things like abortion in this country that every Canadian now sees through. It's the same old strategy, Madam Speaker. Divide and conquer. Divide this country into smaller and smaller pieces so it's easier to keep a grip on power and make sure that everybody forgets how miserable this Prime Minister has made their life. Canadians are tired of this. They're tired of the division, and they're tired of being labeled as some kind of other. They're tired of being told that north is south and up is down and wrong is right. And certainly they are tired of a government that cares more about itself than Canadians. That's what this whole saga is about. It's not just Canadians. It's not just the Prime Minister who's not in it for Canadians. He's in it for himself and for his friends. As long as he has to cling to the job for a bit longer, to ship some more money off to Liberal insiders, he'll do whatever it takes to stay in power, and they will do whatever it takes to argue in this place, not to do their duty and hand over the documents to the RCMP like the Speaker ordered them to. Look at everything happening outside of this place. Violent crime is up 30%. Crimes with firearms have doubled in this country since the Prime Minister came to power. Legal drugs on our streets, loved ones who can't get the help that they need. Car theft in my home region of York Region is up 300% in just 3 years. And there are members of the Liberal caucus who are celebrating an hourly drop in auto theft patterns, and they're patting themselves on the back for it. You don't need to celebrate a 20% decrease in auto theft when it increased 300% under your watch. That's not success. It is a victory lap on failure. And that is exactly what they are doing. The average home price in that same region is $1.3 million, a runaway deficit spending from a finance minister who still misses her targets. Canadians already struggling to make ends meet and afford a place to live are staring down the barrel of even more tax hikes and price increases. And we see it day after day, month after month, year after year, after 9 years of these guys. What we just found out is platforms like Spotify are raising subscription fees. The finance minister already told everybody in this House and every Canadian that she would cut Disney Plus, and I guess she's going to have to tell them to cut Spotify too. That's the latest of the tone-deaf, condescending suggestions from a finance minister who has somebody else pulling the strings at her own department. That's not to mention the serious allegation of election interference from foreign states and the Prime Minister's dangerous complicity in it, or the instability and the insanity happening on the other side of the world in the Middle East, or the out-of-control anti-Semitism on our streets. And we can't talk about any of that in this place. We can't fix any of those things because the government is focused on running out the clock while they try to cover up for their own mismanagement, their own scandal-ridden government. That's what this debate is about. It's about making sure that we no longer let this Prime Minister use his office as a platform to enrich his friends and his own self-interest at the taxpayer expense. There's an easy fix to all of this, and it can happen in mere minutes. The government just needs to release the documents. Give them to the cops. All of them. That's all. We can put this to bed today. Not at a committee, not in its redacted form, just the full documents. If they truly had nothing to hide, then they shouldn't be scared of anything. They certainly shouldn't be scared of turning those documents over. There's no reason why that release cannot happen except for this own government's own obstinance in this place. And you can tell by the arguments that they're making that they are desperate to avoid accountability, blathering on about their endless nonsense about the Charter, which they have used to trample on the rights of Canadians when it suits them. Blathering on about committees so that it dies, this issue dies a slow death under the guise of transparency, and so on and so on. Madam Speaker, I will say this, the Charter was created to protect Canadians from their government. It was not created to protect this government from Canadians, this government from accountability, these Liberals from the people that actually voted them in here. And equally,
but here we are.
If there are allegations and there is wrongdoing, you don't call a committee. You call the RCMP, the people with the power to prosecute the corruption.
The RCMP, the exact same people that the Liberals bought and paid for and admit that they continue to hire more onto as a part of their program to, guess what, investigate themselves. What does that tell you about the RCMP when the Liberals are openly admitting they are behind their payroll?
We need the Mounties to now come in and sort things out because the Prime Minister is obviously not able to sort things out by himself, or that more likely that he's covering up something. He's out of his depth on this in every single way. Like when it comes to representing Canada on the world stage, he allows the nation to be humiliated and embarrassed time and time and again, whether it's a stirring rendition of Bohemian Rhapsody or allowing our country to become a playground for hostile foreign governments, or when it comes to managing our economy. It's a shocker. It is a shocker that the guy who says that the economy grows out from the heart believes that the budget will balance itself and doesn't think about monetary policy and couldn't grow the economy, balance the budget, control inflation rates or interest rates in any way. Not just for this generation, but for generations to come. Or even when it comes to just doing basic things. His government couldn't even make a simple app work. It took them months. And they sent 10,000 people inadvertently, unjustified, to a quarantine. That app should have never existed, didn't need it. It could have been built in a weekend if we needed it at all. And certainly there's corruption in that case itself. And it is no wonder that his caucus and his party are revolting against the Prime Minister. Even
2 liters of milk is almost $8, depending on where you live. My goodness, have we fallen as a society when your basic essentials, bread, milk, eggs, are that expensive.
Shipping off other people's money to line the pockets of Liberal insiders. Pet projects, money to massive corporations, while Canadians go hungry and lose sight of the country that we all once knew and loved.
You know it's bad when the 99-cent Mr. Noodles are no longer 99 cents.
$1 million to McKinsey, $107 million to GC Strategy. That's the 2-person company that's run out of a basement in Ottawa. $900 million to the Wheat Charity, $50 million to MasterCard, billions of dollars of bloated bureaucracies like to Bombardier, and of course to the CBC. And no one can forgive or forget the $100 million that the government has shipped to UNRWA, an agency founded to employ terrorists and participated in the October 7th massacre, and is now trying to argue that it is legally immune from being responsible in doing so. And again, while Canadians go dumpster diving because they can't afford the price of food, Mr. Speaker, we will put an end to all of this. We will put an end to the corporate welfare that lines the pockets of Liberal insiders doing nothing to create jobs or prosperity in this country. We will immediately stop funding UNRWA and start funding our own NATO allies instead. And we will, of course, defund the CBC. They're like without question. But on maybe the CBC first. Simply put, we will give Canadians back control of their money, of their wallets, of their lives, something that this government has refused to do time and time again. It is why we are here after almost a month of arguing, why this government will not turn over documents that you yourself, Mr. Speaker, have told them to turn over, why they will cower from accountability for the people, for their taxpayers to know where their money went, who it enriched, what's in those documents. Mr. Speaker, if they had nothing to hide, they would turn these documents over today. They would turn them over today, and we can end this, and we can get back to Parliament and fix the things that they have broken in this country after 9 years. Cut taxes, build homes, fix the budget, stop crime. There is any number of issues that they have screwed up over 9 years, and we can get back to business if they just turned over those documents to the RCMP exactly like you told them to.
We're going to take a break from this question of privilege to move on to
Big Bad Greg is here,
as well as to question period. The honourable member will have 3 minutes and 25 seconds left to continue her intervention. Statements by members. Déclaration de député. L'honorable député.
Honourable member for
Winnipeg South Centre.
Mr. Speaker, it is with a heavy heart that I rise today and pay tribute to Murray Sinclair. Mr. Speaker, Murray Sinclair strengthened the fabric of this country in ways that few others have. I had the true honor of working closely with him while at Canadian Heritage. As a young staffer, I was in awe of him. I had the true honor, Mr. Speaker, of seeing his kindness, how measured he was, and that he was wise beyond words. He was instrumental in providing us with guidance on the creation of legislation to protect Indigenous languages. I've never seen a public figure so universally revered as him. Senator Sinclair is nothing short of a national hero. Most notably, his work leading the National Commission on Truth and Reconciliation changed the trajectory of this country in the most important of ways. His work to help heal and propel Canada forward will serve us well for decades to come. As a member of Parliament from Manitoba, it is with particular pride and gratitude that I say to Senator Sinclair, thank you for helping us to find the best versions of ourselves in service of this beautiful country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
No, not Big Fat Greg. Big Bad Greg. Greg Fergus, the Speaker.
Abbotsford.
Last week, we laid my father, Edward E. Fast, to rest. He was 97. Raised in Manitoba as a child of Mennonite immigrants, Dad's family barely survived the dirty 30s. By age 14, he and his 6 siblings were orphans. A kind stepmother struggled to feed them. Although poor, Dad was an excellent student and studied dentistry in Toronto. 9 months after marrying Helena Schultz, I was born, and we moved to Vancouver. There my father practiced dentistry for many years. 7 more children were born. My parents ensured that we were deeply loved and properly educated. What animated my father was his deep Christian faith, his family, and an intense interest in politics. It was he who 60 years ago inspired my own career in politics. I know our Father in heaven will have welcomed Dad with the words, "Well done, good and faithful servant." Predeceased by our mother, Dad leaves behind 8 children, 35 grandchildren, and at last count, 109 great-grandchildren. We love you, Dad.
Great job. The honourable member.
I wish YouTube polls had more options than just 4. I could only put 4.
This Awareness Month. Every 3 minutes, one person in this country is diagnosed with diabetes. I want to recognize organizations like Diabetes Canada, Breakthrough, T1D, Diabetes Action Canada, CDA, NIDA, CINA, Diabetes Quebec, and all the researchers, advocates, and volunteers who are doing great work for diabetes.
Yeah, I get that a lot. People say it's hard to find the channel. The best thing I could say is make sure you hit that like button and hit that sub button. And if you don't have a YouTube account, make a YouTube account. And that way you can keep track of all the people you want to obviously subscribe to and stuff like that. I cover House of Commons proceedings and question period whenever it is live. I want to thank each and every one of you for joining right now. Let's get back to it.
Annual World Diabetes Day flag raising ceremony in my city of Brampton. I encourage everyone to join me there. I'm so proud of the work our government has done to pass the Pharmacare Act so that Canadians living with diabetes will have access to diabetes medication. Just as this House stood united behind my bill C-237 to create a national framework for diabetes, by working together, we can defeat diabetes.
The honourable member for Beauport, Côte de Beaupré, Ile d'Orléans, Charlevoix. There's sad news. We learned in Quebec yesterday, the cultural journalist Henri Moreau died at the age of 67 years. Erbican knew everyone, and everyone knew him and appreciated him. He was a natural communicator, and he always added prestige to our cultural events. He frequented the biggest stars in Hollywood, but his passion was always for Quebec. He always was able to underscore our artists locally, and the Bloc would like to offer their sincerest condolences to his loved ones and his son Julien, and pay tribute to the son of Haiti, who offered some of the most important moments of the Quebec artistic scene. The honourable member for Sherbrooke. Mr. Speaker, November 14th is World Diabetes Day. It's an opportunity to raise public awareness of this disease, which affects 1 in 10 worldwide. In Quebec, 1.2 million people live with diabetes. Today, I met some diabetic children who are visiting Parliament. They told me about their daily lives with the disease, and I was impressed not only by their courage and resilience, but also by their plans and dreams, which defy this disease. I am very familiar with the situation faced by these families, because in February 2017, at the age of 18, my son Charles was also diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. Thanks to research, the equipment Charles uses has greatly improved. It greatly facilitates the day-to-day management of this disease, allowing him, among other things, to flourish as a physical education teacher. I'd like to take this opportunity to pay tribute to the people who live with this disease and their loved ones who support them. I'm very happy that the Canadian government is working to develop a universal national pharmacare plan, which will provide coverage for a range of diabetes medication and supplies. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I move on to the next person, I would like to tell all members to please keep your statements to 60 seconds or less. I don't like to go over too much.
Grasslands. After 9 long years, Canadians are desperate for a change from the NDP Liberal government. Food Banks Canada recently released their hunger count report. Over 2 million Canadians are visiting food banks each month. The report found a 6% increase in food bank visits compared to the previous year, which had already broken a previous record. That's what we're seeing happen under this carbon tax regime. That failed socialist experiment starves Canadians, and it attacks our energy industry, which is key to Western Canada's economy and fuels prosperity across the country. Back home in Saskatchewan, Food Banks of Saskatchewan has said that children make up 30% of people in need nationally. But in Saskatchewan, that number jumps up for children up to 39%. That's almost a 10% increase. Meanwhile, the total number of visits has gone up 42% since 2019 due to carbon tax, inflation, and housing costs. The Liberals refuse to fix what they broke, and that's exactly why Canadians are demanding change. Conservatives stand ready to axe the tax and bring home affordability. It's time for the Prime Minister to call a carbon tax election.
The honourable member from Davenport.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to commemorate the 101st anniversary of the establishment of the Republic of Turkey. On October 29, 1923, Turkey was formally declared a republic. It was also the day they elected their first president, Mustafa Kemal Atatürk. Atatürk, beloved to this day by Turks all around the world, and is credited with creating the foundations of modern-day Turkey. Canadians of Turkish origin are a vibrant community whose language, culture, and traditions have enriched the social fabric of Canadian society. Now in 2024, the Canadian Turkish community has grown to more than 75,000 strong. Organizations such as the Federation of Canadian Turkish Associations and the Turkish Culture and Folkloric Society of Canada work hard to put on important events for the community throughout the year. I want to acknowledge them and thank them for their contributions. Canada is stronger because of our diversity, and the Turkish-Canadian community has made us a stronger and better country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from St. Catharines.
Last week, the Conservative leader announced his plan to shut down housing projects across the country. He's proposing reckless cuts that will devastate housing progress in Canada, including in my own riding of St. Catharines. Even his own MPs are going behind his back to secretly write the minister to support the Housing Accelerator Fund and advocate that their communities get the funding their leader wants to cut. Let's be clear about what's at stake. Reckless Conservative housing cuts could jeopardize up to 750,000 homes over the next decade. By his own math, the Conservative leader wants to build at least 450,000 fewer homes. Canadians can't afford these cuts to housing. Conservative MPs need to stand up for their communities and stand up against their leader's reckless housing cuts. We need to build more homes, not less. It's painfully obvious that the Conservative leader is not serious about housing.
The honourable member from Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, last year a report from an international tax watchdog accused Brookfield of dodging taxes around the world, stating that there is an apparent pattern of aggressive tax avoidance consistent across Brookfield's global operations. So it's no coincidence that last week Brookfield, a megacorp chaired by senior Liberal economic advisor Mark Carbon Tax Carney, announced it's moving its headquarters from Toronto to Wall Street. Reports say Brookfield pays a measly average tax rate of 6.1%, but the average Canadian family pays a whopping 45% of their average household income in taxes. Here's the reality. Carney gets paid more if Brookfield pays less tax. And while he works to make sure that his company pays less tax, he wants Canadians to pay more carbon tax, all while he's formally advising the Prime Minister on economic policies without ethics or lobbying guidelines. Colleagues, this is wrong. It's time for the NDP Liberals to stop letting this man put his own profit over the people of Canada.
Hear, hear. The honourable member from Surrey Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week we learned that the Conservative leader will reverse Canada's housing progress and cut programs that are building more homes faster in Surrey and across the country. And it's not just his own MPs that disagree with his reckless housing cuts. Mayors across the country, including former Conservative MPs, are sounding the alarm over the cuts. The Housing Accelerator Fund invests in housing in Surrey and every local community across Canada. But the Conservative leader wants to shut these housing projects down. Interest rates are down. Housing starts are up. Housing permits are up. We need to build on this progress, not take it backwards to the days when the Conservative leader was Harper's former failed housing minister. He failed to build more homes back then, and he wants to reverse housing progress now. Canadians can't afford these Conservative housing cuts. We need more homes, and we won't let the Conservative leader stand in our way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Good job. I laughed at that Cthulhu fucking comment more than I should have.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal costly coalition, there is only one person keeping the Prime Minister in power. That is the leader of the NDP. Right. Remember the NDP leader's big stunt when he told Canadians he ripped up the coalition deal with the Liberals. It was just a scam on the poor voters of Elmwood Transcona right before a by-election. The NDP leader said, and I quote, "The fact is, the Liberals are too weak, too selfish, and too beholden to corporate interest to fight for Canadians." While the NDP leader supports the punishing carbon tax, voting for it over 24 times, Canadians visit food banks in record-smashing numbers. Every day the Prime Minister stays in power, it is because of the leader of the NDP who lacks the courage to do elsewhere. It is time for the Prime Minister to call a carbon tax election now so Canadians can make the choice.
That's right, here.
The honourable member for Levis-Lotbinière. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the Bloc is not worth the cost of housing. Rents, mortgage payments, and down payments have doubled. But the good news is that a Conservative government will slash the federal sales tax on new homes sold across the country. This tax cut will save buyers $40,000 or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments on an $800,000 home. This measure will stimulate the construction of more than 30,000 additional homes a year and give buyers who are struggling to find homes a break. Mr. Speaker, our Conservative proposal has been hailed by the Quebec Property Owners Corporation as a step in the right direction that will ease the cost of housing. Mr. Speaker, the evidence is clear that the only common-sense Conservatives will restore Canada's promise, where hard work guarantees a bigger paycheck that buys food and affordable housing in safe neighbourhoods. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Windsor to Tecumseh.
Mr. Speaker, this Friday, my wife and I were honoured to join the vibrant and growing Sikh community in Windsor-Tecumseh to celebrate Bundi Chor Divas. We prayed together, lit clay lamps, rolled roti in the kitchen, and shared langar. The news from the RCMP that foreign agents of the Government of India participated in serious crimes on Canadian soil against Sikh Canadians has shaken my community, just as it has shaken all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. To think for even 1 second that a member of my community could be targeted or killed for their religious or political beliefs by an agent working on behalf...
Well, that's what happens when you bring your entire country over here. People left India, people fled from India to live a better life in Canada, and now they have brought the exact same Civil War stuff that's happened there over here. And that is a lack of care within the government. And this guy right here is part of the Liberal government, is sitting there pointing the finger at the Conservatives, trying to shift the blame. It's actually just sad at this point.
The honourable member from Nanaimo Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Nanaimo Ladysmith, we are fortunate to have individuals and organizations championing the rights of those living with disabilities. One such group is the Self-Advocates of Nanaimo.
What's up, Sean? How's it going?
For people with diverse abilities to have a voice and to join together in advocacy, mentorship, education, and community building. It was such an honor to meet with self-advocates Miranda, Barbara, Pat, Crystal, CJ, Nick, and Ryan, as well as the advisory and outreach supporters Gwen and Cheyenne. These incredible self-advocates shared with me important stories of strength, as well as that of unacceptable challenges. People living with disabilities need and deserve enough to live with dignity and respect. Up to $200 a month is nowhere near enough. The applications necessary for supports need to be free and accessible, and housing is in dire need. To the self-advocates of Nanaimo, I hear you and I stand with you.
Hear, 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 hear.
The Honourable Member for Drummond. Quebec culture shone brightly last night, all dressed up in our finest for the annual High Mass of Music and Entertainment, i.e. the ADISQ Gala. How good it was to see and hear Quebec artists of all generations who continue to enrich our culture, from traditional music to pop, rap, and hip-hop. It was magical to see Les Trois Écorts, Karuka, Roxane Bruno, Rock Voisine, and Isabelle Boulay, among others. All were electrifying on stage. How touching to remember the departed Jean-Pierre Ferland and Carl Tremblay. And how satisfying was it to see the cowboy fringant walk away with 3 Felix Awards. And although the evening was festive, we also must remember that the culture needs to be taken seriously when it comes to support, such as reform of the Copyright Act to ensure a future for our creators. But despite these challenges, they're always there to sing our joys, our sorrows, and our hopes. Thanks to Quebec artists, the show is far from over. Thank you.
The honourable member from Hastings, Lennox and Addington.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, they are not worth the cost of homes and housing. The sad reality is that this government is focused on building deficits, not homes, and young Canadians are paying the price. Over half of Canadians under 35 say they want to own a home, and that same amount are saying this government's economic mismanagement is making that dream impossible. Common sense Conservatives will axe the tax on new homes sold. On an $800,000 home, this tax cut will save homebuyers $2,200 a month in mortgage payments. The response to this plan has been impressive. The Canadian Real Estate Association said a positive move toward lowering building costs, increasing housing supplies, and making home ownership more attainable for Canadians. And Habitat for Humanity concluded that it would reduce costs, passing on savings to Habitat homeowners. Mr. Speaker, it is only the Conservatives that have united industry, advocates, and Canadians on housing, and it is only Conservatives that will build the houses and bring young Canadians home.
The honourable member from Brampton North.
Happy Diwali, Mr. Speaker. Last week I celebrated the Festival of Lights in my riding by going to local mandirs and gurdwaras, and what made Diwali even more special was that the Prime Minister dropped by to celebrate with Bramptonians. Today we'll continue the grand celebration on the Hill hosted by the Liberal caucus with many in attendance from across the country. This celebration on the Hill is a testament to our commitment to inclusivity and respect for all communities. In contrast, the Conservative caucus cancelled their Diwali celebration, proving that all the Conservatives care about is themselves. The celebration of Diwali is one that is shared among Hindus and Sikhs, and over the last few days I've witnessed these communities celebrating together in harmony. However, I am also deeply troubled by what took place yesterday. First, the protests and acts of violence that took place outside the Hindu Sabha Mandir, and then the counter-protests and violence that took place at Guru Singh Sabha Gurdwara. Everyone deserves to feel safe and respected in their places of worship. There is no room for such actions in our society. Let's respect the true essence and teachings of Diwali and Bandi Chhor Divas. Come together in respect and unity.
Oral questions. Questions orales. The honourable member from Regina.
Question period!
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal Prime Minister's economic vandalism, over 2 million Canadians are visiting a food bank in a single month. Housing costs have doubled, and inflation continues to eat away at Canadians' paychecks. His massive deficits and tax hikes are causing extreme damage to the Canadian economy. For 8 out of the last 9 quarters, Canadian per-person GDP is down. This is a made-in-Canada per-person GDP recession. That means Canadian workers work harder but bring home less. So will the Prime Minister stop his economic vandalism and cancel his job-killing, paycheck-shrinking tax hikes?
The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning we heard the sad news of the passing of the Honourable Murray Sinclair. Let me take a moment before we begin today to say a few words about him. As a former judge, senator, and chair of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, Murray was determined to help Canada reckon with its colonial realities and bring healing to this country. He was a visionary and a leader, and his kind and fierce commitment to truth has pushed Canada forward in profound and lasting ways. Our hearts and minds are with his family, and Canada is a much better place for his service.
The honourable member from Regina Capel.
I join in my honourable colleagues' sending of condolences, but we are witnessing economic vandalism in real time. Last Thursday, this government was briefed that the only sector of the Canadian economy actually producing any growth was the energy sector. And what did they do today? They slapped a punishing cap on Canadian production. All this will do is chase investments and jobs to other countries. But that's something this Prime Minister is good at. He's increased Canadian investment into the U.S. by $63 billion last year alone. So will the Prime Minister stop fueling the U.S. economy, cancel his tax hikes, and cancel the production cap to bring those investment dollars back home?
The Honourable Minister for Natural Resources and Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today, we were very pleased to announce an emissions cap with respect to the oil and gas sector in this country. Given that oil and gas constitutes 31% of Canada's greenhouse gas emissions, it is important that we work with the sector to reduce emissions, just as we do with every sector. It is also true that as we move towards a lower carbon economy across the world, oil and gas produced with the lowest emissions is actually going to have value around the world. We are moving forward with a plan to address climate change and build a strong economy going forward. They are stuck in the past and ignoring the science of climate.
Before I get to the honourable member, I'm just going to ask the honourable member from Calgary Centre, please, to hold on until his question is turned to ask.
Starting off early, Greg, aren't we?
Member from Regina Capel.
All this production cap will do is make other countries richer while making Canadians poorer. But that's something this Prime Minister is so good at. Consider this, GDP per capita in Canada, down. In the US, it's up. 9 years ago, average wages in the US and Canada were almost identical. Now, an American worker brings home $22,000 more than their Canadian counterpart. And $500 billion in investments has fled Canada to the United States, creating bigger paychecks for American workers, all because of this Prime Minister's high taxes and massive deficits. The Prime Minister is the #1 job creator in the United States.
Yes.
So instead of helping the Canadian economy, why not fight for Canada for once?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, maybe the member opposite should take the time to actually read the information about the pollution cap. Production is forecast to increase 16% by 2030, Mr. Speaker. So this idea that we're somehow cutting production is simply not true.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. After 9 years of this Prime Minister, supported by the Bloc, $500 million has left Canada for the U.S. The Conservatives will bring investment and jobs back to Canada. This Prime Minister's high taxes and deficits have helped the U.S. prosper while Canadians are desperately trying to house and feed themselves. A U.S. worker now earns $22,000 more than his Canadian counterpart. Will the Prime Minister keep abdicating his responsibilities? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker.
Oh, thank God it's not a real voice.
A patriotic Canadian woman, and I believe that we live in a wonderful country. I wouldn't want to be American. But if the Conservatives want to compare, well, this is what should be compared. Inflation is lower in Canada. The prime lending rate is lower in Canada. The average Canadian's lifespan is 4 years longer. So the Conservatives keep thinking the U.S. is better than Canada. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. What's worse is after 9 years of this Prime Minister, three different U.S. presidents, this government has been incapable of producing wealth in Canada. The gap between wealth is growing, whether it's the softwood lumber or the Buy American Act. This Prime Minister has failed miserably to protect Canadian workers. He's creating more jobs. He's the #1 job creator in the U.S. When will the Prime Minister stand up for Canada, cut taxes, and bring our money and our jobs and our investments back to Canada? The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance. Mr. Speaker, once again, here's what we do better in Canada. Inflation is lower. The prime lending rate is lower. The average lifespan is longer. I will quote from David Rosenberg, a well-known economist. He said that last week, investors based in the U.S. should contemplate leaving New York for Toronto. And that's because he knows that Canadian companies are doing better. Who better to quote, Mr. Speaker?
Député de La Prairie.
The Honourable Member for La Prairie. On the eve of the U.S. elections, Peter Harder and other senators must not be blocking our bill to protect supply management in free trade deals, because we know that the U.S. wants to reopen the trade deal. This is not just harmful, it's dangerous because it will cause hundreds of thousands of job losses in Quebec. Will the Prime Minister stop threatening Quebec's farmers? The Honourable Minister of Agriculture and Agri-Food. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, being a farmer all my life and then being involved in the supply management system for all my agricultural career, I am fully aware of how valuable the supply management system is to this country. And I belong to a government and a party that has initiated supply management and continue to support supply management. And I can tell my honourable colleague in this country that this government will continue to support the supply management program.
The honourable member for La Prairie. The next U.S. president could open up NAFTA or the free trade deal in 2026. And depending who wins, it could be our supply management system that pays the price. So our farmers would like to hear their will respected. They don't want two unelected senators to hold up a bill to protect supply management. Will the Prime Minister stop those two senators from preventing C-282 from passing? The Honourable Minister of National Revenue. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already explained to our Bloc friends that senators are independent. And the other thing is that the Bloc admits that they can't protect supply management. The only people who can, because we truly want to and we're committed to doing so, is us. Whatever happens on the other side of the U.S. border, only a Liberal government will protect supply management here.
The honourable member from Burnaby South.
Uh-oh.
In Canada, we believe healthcare should be there when you need it and it should be free. Today, Collège des médecins du Québec président was quoted saying that patients are typically told, I can do your surgery in 14 months. If you come to my private clinic, I can get it done in 1 month. It'll cost you $25,000. Dr. Trudeau says that's questionable if not illegal. I think it's pretty clearly illegal. Does the Prime Minister agree?
Hear, hear.
Yeah. The Honourable Minister of Health.
Public, universal, available for all, and most of all, making sure that the patient doesn't pay. That we ensure in our country that when people come in for care, that they're taken care of on the basis of their need, not the size of their bank account. That's what distinguishes us from so many countries in the world. That is a principle that we stand up proudly for. I would suggest to the Leader of the NDP, we've worked well together on things from pharmacare to dental care. There are many different challenges the provinces are presenting to health care right now, and certainly this party opposite, the Conservatives that would seek to ravage our health care system. Let's work together to make sure we protect it.
L'honorable député de Burnaby Sud.
The Liberals are letting people get charged to get to the front of the line. That should be illegal.
In Quebec, the private sector is taking up more and more of a role in healthcare. The Quebec College of Physicians and Surgeons is calling for this trend to be dealt with as quickly as possible. People who seek profit are causing longer delay times for healthcare. Why is the Prime Minister allowing U.S.-style companies to take advantage of Canadians suffering?
The Bloc was going to call a vote of non-confidence in Trudeau, but that came and went within seconds.
Absolutely clear is that it's our government's priority to ensure that our healthcare system is universal and entirely public and available to all Canadians. We've made a lot of headway with dental care and pharmacare, but I think there's a lot of work that can still be done, that should still be done. But on the other side, the Conservative Party wants to cut. They want to make huge cuts to funding for health care, and that's totally unacceptable, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, almost 50% of young Canadians believe they will never own a home. This Liberal housing accelerator is an absolute joke. Common sense Conservatives have a plan. They're going to axe the GST on new home builds. On an $800,000 house, this will save $40,000. Wow. And the Conservative leader has now written to the premiers of every province asking them to match this tax cut. When will these NDP Liberals finally get it through their heads? They're funding bureaucracies, axe the tax on new builds so young people can buy a house.
The Bloc were waiting for the Liberals to hand over some sort of documents or sign some sort of legislation in, and I'm assuming the Liberals probably did it.
Speaker, has he consulted with his caucus? A dozen, probably more, Conservative members have advocated specifically for that program. They went behind the back of the Leader of the Opposition because they wanted to advocate for their constituents to see more homes built. By calling for the end of the Housing Accelerator Fund, which is how they would pay for this new bold idea, so-called, they would end support to communities for homelessness, they would end support for more building for middle-class Canadians. Mr. Speaker, it's an unacceptable, untenable position.
Well said.
The honourable member from Dufferin-Caledon.
Oh man, here's what Liberal housing advisor Mike P. Moffat said about the Liberal housing accelerator. Can anyone in the federal government tell me why Toronto deserves $471 million in housing accelerator funds to massively hike development taxes? And housing starts in Toronto are down 20%. Even Liberal advisors know the housing accelerator's a joke. Will these NDP Liberals finally realize they're funding bureaucracies, tripling development charges, and not getting any houses built for young Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Young Canadians, he talks about home building in Canada, Mr. Speaker. They have 6 homes to point to when they were in office. Wow. That's the sum total of their work when they were in office, when the Leader of the Opposition held the so-called role of Minister of Housing. He wasn't a minister at all, Mr. Speaker. In fact, if you look at the 190,000 number that they talk about during their time in office, that was home builders who did that, Mr. Speaker. It was not them. They know nothing about getting homes built. They know only about cuts. They would only make cuts to communities. It's not an acceptable position, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Parry Sound, Muskoka.
After 9 years of this NDP Liberal government, we know they're not worth the cost of housing. So bad is their record, in fact, that 80% of young Canadians believe that home ownership is only for the very rich. Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes sold under $1 million, saving Canadians up to $50,000 or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments. The Conservative leader has written premiers asking them to match our Conservative plan to axe the tax on housing, saving Canadians thousands more. This means real relief for young Canadians desperately trying to buy a home. Will the NDP Liberals axe the tax on housing so young Canadians can finally buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I worked with the honourable member on the House of Commons committee that's responsible for housing. He almost always brings up good points, except today there's a credibility issue at stake, Mr. Speaker. When he was mayor of Huntsville, prior to becoming member of Parliament, he increased development charges, which we agree are an impediment to home building. They are a tax on home building. How much did he increase development charges, Mr. Speaker? Not by 2 or 3%, Mr. Speaker, but by 16%, Mr. Speaker. They can't speak about these issues. They have no credibility on the matter.
Order. The honourable member from Parry Sound, Muskoka.
Well, Mr. Speaker, when I was on council, we actually cut development charges by 50%, and I also knew as a mayor that if you get bureaucracy out of the way, you get more homes built. These guys don't understand that, though. All they're doing is funding the bureaucracy. Since this minister has given billions of dollars to cities all across this country, they've raised development charges and housing starts have dropped. Our common sense plan will save Canadians up to $50,000 on a new home. This is real relief for Canadians. So why can't they get on board and axe the tax on new homes?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, like former Conservatives, people like Joe Clark, for example, I recognize that Canada is a community of communities. And as an urban-based MP, I want to assure the honourable member opposite that I read the Huntsville Doppler, the newspaper of record in his community. He increased development charges by 16%. It was reported time and again in that newspaper, Mr. Speaker. They want to cut support for communities. They want to cut support for housing. Don't be fooled. The Leader of the Opposition ditched his glasses. Same guy that wants to cut pensions, support for housing, support for young people, support for EI. They're not serious, Mr. Speaker.
L'honorable député de Bellechasse.
The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, after 9 years, the Bloc Liberal Coalition has discouraged young people from owning their own home. They've doubled rents, mortgage payments, and down payments. As we speak, 80% of Canadians think home ownership is only for the very rich. Our leader has tabled a common-sense proposal, cut the GST on new homes. This idea has the support of CORPIC, the Quebec Residential Rental Properties Owners Association. Will the Bloc-backed Liberals scrap the federal tax on housing, or will they keep on funding their own programs that don't build any houses? The Honourable Minister for the Economic Development Agency. Mr. Speaker, my colleague's proposal is completely ill thought out because not only does it not deal with any increase in the supply of housing, it also comes at the expense of the poorest. Their agenda is clear now. They want to help people who want to buy, but cut back for people in need. I'd like to know from my colleague, the housing in her own riding, how is she going to explain to her constituents that she would cut and put in danger the rents of the people who need that housing? The honourable member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins-Lévis. She can ask questions when she's in opposition. Mr. Speaker, the Conservative leader's proposal to scrap the GST on houses under $1 million would give young people the hope of being able to buy a home and maybe start a family. With this GST cut, some 30,000 new homes could be built. For an $800,000 home, for example, the GST savings would be $40,000. What's keeping this Liberal bloc government from showing a little compassion and common sense by going ahead with our proposal?
And I would assume the Liberals probably gave it to them because there is no vote of non-confidence. They haven't pushed it. We're still sitting here.
Colleague knows this. The Conservative leader was responsible for the construction of only 6 housing units during his entire term. Last week, an agreement was what the Conservatives would do would be cutting a deal that has led to the building of thousands of units in Quebec, including units for seniors in need in the members' riding. That's the type of thing the Conservatives would like to cut. The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Quebec is still taking in more than its fair share of asylum seekers. And this is serious. There's still no plan for redistributing them among the other provinces. Immigration could skyrocket with tomorrow's U.S. election, and Donald Trump has said if he wins, he'll launch the largest deportation program in U.S. history. He wants to deport 18 million people. We asked the minister if he had a plan in case Trump's promises drive people into Canada, and he said yes. That's great. Now, can he explain that plan, Mr. Speaker? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. The member knows full well that for a number of months we've been reducing the number of asylum seekers arriving by 29% in Quebec. And this is the type of thing we can do by working together with Quebec in order to have a well-managed border with the U.S. And we will continue to do that regardless of who's the president tomorrow. But it's maybe
tomorrow's going to be a big day, man. Holy, what an insane
to govern
week.
is to plan, and the Immigration Department has proven at every conceivable opportunity that they're not very good at it. So we're going to keep asking the minister for details of this plan, because without details, there's no good reason to believe it even exists. Tomorrow, if Trump wins, he's promised to deport 18 million people. Our organizations tell us if they're worried about a wave of immigration when Canada is already unable to manage the current influx of asylum seekers, well, what's coming? What's the plan if that happens?
But I don't understand. Why do they act like he's going to deport all 18 million people directly into Canada? I don't think that's how that's going to work.
To tell them about it 24 hours before an election, that would be very imprudent, very irresponsible to do here in the House of Commons now. The honourable member for Lac Saint-Jean. Well, if he doesn't want to answer questions, he shouldn't show up at question period. Mr. Speaker, the last time Donald Trump threatened to deport people, many headed for Canada. The result was Roxham Road, and we're still suffering the consequences.
Just fucking
The
annihilated
result was
him.
Roxham Road because the federal government had no plan. The Prime Minister issued a blanket invitation to a wave of immigration without making the slightest preparations to get ready for it. And then it took him years to react. Today, Trump is setting the table for an even bigger wave than the one on Roxham Road. Nobody wants to live through that all over again.
That was a good one. You shouldn't show up to question period if you don't want to answer questions.
I won't do like the Bloc does constantly. We do have a plan. We'll keep working on it regardless of who's president tomorrow. This is not something that we're going to discuss on the floor of the House of Commons 24 hours before a U.S. election. So unlike the Bloc, we'll talk about that later.
After 9 years of these NDP Liberals, they are not worth the cost of housing. 50% of young Canadians have abandoned the dream of buying a home one day. Rent, mortgage, and down payment costs have all doubled. Common sense Conservatives will axe the federal sales tax on new homes sold. On an $800,000 house, this will save home buyers $40,000 or $2,200 a year in mortgage payments. Our plan means more housing for young Canadians desperately trying to enter the housing market for the first time. Will the NDP Liberals axe the GST on housing for more young Canadians so they can finally buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
Mr. Speaker, as we've seen, the Conservatives continue to say that they'll make cuts to pay for their proposals, including this GST initiative, so-called. So what will that mean? It means the Accelerator Fund will come to an end. The member is from Kelowna. A few weeks ago, I met with Kelowna's Mayor Tom Dias, who shared with me that federal funding secured through the Housing Accelerator Fund has led to a digital permit system that's improved approvals that would have taken even a year ago, a year and a half plus to approve. That approval permit process now is less than 10 days, Mr. Speaker. Huge change.
The Honourable Member from Kelowna Lake Country.
Well, even the Liberal housing advisor, Mike P. Moffat, on the failed Liberal housing plan said the federal Liberals have lost the plot. Habitat for Humanity said reducing GST would reduce costs. Canadian Home Builders Association said it will make a big difference. Canadian Real Estate Association said this proposed step is a positive move forward, lowering building costs, increasing housing supplies, and making home ownership more attainable for Canadians. Will the NDP Liberals axe the GST on housing so more young Canadians can finally buy a home?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, the simple answer is the Conservative policy on housing is a dud. That's the bottom line, Mr. Speaker. And let me tell you about an issue that Canadians are truly concerned about. You have the leader of the Conservative Party that continues to refuse to get a security clearance. I believe Canadians have a right to know why it is that the Conservative leader refuses to get it. What is he hiding? Is there something about his past that Canadians should know about? It's time the leader step up and be honest with Canadians.
The Honourable Member from Mission Matsqui Fraser Canyon.
Mr. Speaker, after 9 years of NDP Liberals, they are simply not worth the cost of housing. There are encampments all over the city of Abbotsford, including our beloved Cenotaph. Young people are feeling hopeless, knowing that even with a good salary, they will not be able to afford a new house. Conservatives understand that, and that's why we've proposed to a federal GST on new homes, a tax cut that will spark 30,000 new developments. Will the NDP Liberals axe the federal GST on housing so more young Canadians can finally buy a home? There you go.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Housing, Infrastructure and Communities.
They want to pay Accelerator Fund. So let's understand what that means, Mr. Speaker. This is support for communities across the country, large and small. Support for communities to get people off the street and into homes. Support for zoning changes that will allow for more building. Giving young people, the ones that they talk about and claim to care about here today, more options. You give people more options, the the costs come down, Mr. Speaker. Infrastructure support, so that water connections, for example, can be connected to housing. They don't believe in that either. Support for vacant buildings to be converted into housing, Mr. Speaker. All of this is on the table.
The honourable member from North Island, Powell River.
Mr. Speaker, Persian Gulf War veterans are asking this government for recognition. Brave soldiers came home with Gulf War illness, PTSD, and burn pit poisoning. And still they have to fight the Liberals to get the recognition and benefits they deserve, just like they had to fight the Conservatives before them. It is shameful. Will the minister make this right and grant these veterans wartime status, or will she hide behind legislation and disrespect their service?
Hear, 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 hear.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of des Anciens Combattants.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the Committee on Veterans Affairs has currently studied this matter. We're waiting for their report, and I can assure you that the government will respond to that forthwith. The Persian Gulf War veterans have done a great service for this country, and we all deserve to see their response from this report, and I assure you that the government will respond accordingly. Thank you.
The honourable member from Windsor West.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have done nothing to protect Canadians from giant telcos pricing gouging. For weeks, hundreds of Canadians are raising their voices because they feel bamboozled. They signed a service contract, were promised a price, then the bills come in with even higher prices. Giant telcos are digging deeper in Canadian pockets. Meanwhile, Liberals sit on their hands and Conservatives are silent as to not upset their CEO donors. Canadians deserve better. Will the minister finally use his powers to stop these snake oil salesman tactics that the telcos use to trick Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We expect all telecommunication companies to clearly communicate contract terms and pricing changes to its customers. The minister has spoken directly with Rogers on this important issue. And in the past two budgets, we've taken critical steps to crack down on unnecessary fees and eliminate switching charges so customers can cancel and switch to cheaper plans and access lower charges. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Mississauga Malton.
Mr. Speaker, very recently we've seen acts of unlawfulness and indecency at the Hindu Sabha Mandir in Brampton and the Shri Guru Granth Sabha in Malton. Speaker, the vast majority of Canadians are peace-loving and believe that every Canadian should have the right to practice their faith freely and safely. We've also heard from the RCMP that foreign elements are seeking to destabilize the harmony in our communities to provide evidence for their own rhetoric. These actions must be condemned. Can the minister please comment on these incidents and tell Canadians what the government is doing to keep them safe? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister for Diversity, Inclusion and People with Disabilities.
Mr. Speaker, we strongly condemn acts of violence, hate that took place outside Hindu Sabha Mandir and Guru Singh Sabha Gurdwara. These acts need to stop. Everyone deserves to feel safe in their places of worship. I've spoken to Peel Regional Police Chief Nish and have full confidence in our local authorities to investigate and to de-escalate. As Canadians, Mr. Speaker, we must stand united against hate and against all those who try to destabilize peace and unity between our communities. Thank you.
The Honourable.
But you keep allowing these acts of violence to happen over and over again. It's non-stop.
Caboose to America's high-flying economic engine. The GDP per capita has become so stark that the average American worker is now making $22,000 more than the Canadian worker. Why? Well, because Americans don't pay a carbon tax. They don't have high fly-raising capital gains taxes. And they don't have soft trade policies. So when will this Prime Minister finally admit that his high taxes, soft trade policies have derailed Canadian prosperity, or is he content in keeping Canadian workers riding in the back in the caboose?
Good question. The Honourable Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance.
Prepare your ears.
Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives may have an inferiority complex vis-a-vis the United States, but I sure don't. Let me tell you what's better in Canada. Inflation is lower. interest rates are lower. We live 4 years longer because we have a universal single-payer healthcare system. And you know what? Investors are noticing the Canadian advantage. Here's what David Rosenberg said last week. U.S.-based investors should strongly consider moving from New York to Toronto because returns here are better too.
She looks like the blueberry girl from Willy Wonka.
Amazing, Mr. Speaker, because the Liberal candidate Mark Carney moved his company to New York. But let me tell you what's actually happening in the Canadian economy. 90,000 jobs have been lost since 2015 in the softwood lumber industry. 90,000 jobs, 40,000 of them in BC alone. The last Prime Minister figured the softwood lumber deal in 79 days. It's been 9 years and 3 U.S. presidents. How many jobs have to be chopped before he figures out, this Prime Minister figures out that high taxes and a weak, soft spine won't bring jobs back and paychecks to Canadians and across the softwood lumber industry?
When they speak in French, it gets translated over, so that's why you hear a different voice than the original.
Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we will take no lessons from these weak Conservatives when it comes to standing up for the Canadian national interest. And that's because we remember the 232 steel and aluminum interests that the U.S. imposed on us. And when we did that, we retaliated. We had the guts to do that. And you know what the Conservatives said? They urged us to back down. They said that retaliation was dumb. They would sell Canadian interests out again in a minute. We will never do that.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le Mr. Speaker, after 9 years and 3 American presidents, this Prime Minister has failed to renegotiate the softwood lumber agreement. He failed where the previous Conservative Prime Minister succeeded. And that just 90 days after being elected. After the closing of the sawmill in Maniwaki and in Mauricie, we now learned that another sawmill is about to close its doors in Quebec. Why are the Liberals continuing to abandon forestry workers? The Honourable Minister of Exports and International Development, Trade. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
I want to thank the honourable member for that question. As he well knows,
oh, look who it is. It's Mary Ng.
Industry is really important in creating thousands and thousands of jobs across this country. Right. We've been working very hard with the forestry industry, but what I've also learned from the sector is that they're really looking to expand into new markets, and I'm very pleased that our government, the Trade Commissioner Service, is really helping them to access new markets while at the same time working to continue to try to get a deal with the United States. Thanks so much.
The Honourable Member for Chicoutimi-Le Mr. Speaker, I'll say it again, 3 American presidents. And 9 years later, this Liberal Prime Minister has still not managed to renegotiate a softwood lumber agreement. That's pure incompetence and a clear lack of leadership. 3 sawmills have closed their doors in just a few months. The most recent in Saint-Ludger-de-Millau. It's a village of 600 people. 100 of those people are about to lose their jobs. When will there be elections so that our leader can succeed where this Prime Minister has lamentably failed?
It speaks volumes that not a single person here, left, right, NDP bloc, have said anything. They don't say anything about her being here still.
They contribute tremendously, not only to the economy of Quebec, but certainly to the economy of Canada. But I do have a question for the member opposite, and that is for his leader. And why is the leader not going to get his security clearance so that he can protect Canadians? That's right.
The Honourable Member for Repentigny. The Environment Minister's announcement today is extremely disappointing. It's been 2 years since he presented his intention to regulate a cap on GHG emissions in the oil and gas sector. And you can understand our impatience, but there's nothing in the minister's announcement which will reduce oil production. Quite the contrary. He says that it's going to go up by 16%. No effort required for big oil. The oil companies will continue to beat production records with the approval of this Liberal government. When will they start to really fight climate change? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I don't know what to say. The Bloc Québécois
quite the escalation.
encouraging us to interfere in provincial jurisdictions. The world is turning upside down. Natural resources, as the Bloc Québécois knows very well, is provincial jurisdiction. So what we will do is act on pollution, and that's exactly what we're doing, Mr. Speaker. The sector is going to have to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 35% under 2019 levels. This is an important element in our climate change plan, and on this side of the House, we believe in climate change. We have a plan for the economy, and we have a plan for the future of workers in the sector. The Honourable Member for Jonquière. What the minister isn't saying is that there's a major part of the money that's coming from Quebec. 9 years now the Liberals have been in power, and the Bloc has been calling for a cap on oil and gas sector GHG emissions. 3 years ago, they promised to do it. 2 years ago, they tabled a draft regulation without putting anything into place. And all that to end up with regulations that don't require any results from the oil and gas sector before 2030. It's that inaction that's going to lead us straight into the wall in 2030. Not the upcoming election, not the opposition party. So why is the minister incapable of requiring even just a little effort from the oil and gas sector before 2030? The Honourable Minister of the Environment and Climate Change. Mr. Speaker, I have a lot of respect for my honourable colleague, but I would sincerely invite him to read the documentation on the oil and gas sector emissions cap, which requires that the regulations come into effect in 2026, not in 2030, as he said. We presented the document a year ago, not 2 years ago, Mr. Speaker, and if since the Bloc Québécois seems to be so eager to go to elections with the Conservatives, well, they can do it, but there won't be a cap on emissions in the oil and gas sector if they do that. They'll be able to pollute all they want under a Conservative government.
Member from Parliamentary.
After 9 years of NDP Liberals, taxes are up, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. The cost of the carbon tax is sending record numbers of Canadians to food banks, but food banks are struggling with the carbon tax too. For one Alberta food bank, paying the carbon tax means that there is $280,000 less food for those who are going hungry. This Prime Minister's policies are hurting the most vulnerable and those who work to help them. So will the Prime Minister finally call a carbon tax election so Conservatives can fix what he broke?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government.
Mr. Speaker, we all know that the leader of the Conservative Party had a flip-flop when it came to the price on pollution. But where we're really disappointed is that we have a leader of the Conservative Party who refuses to put Canadians' interest ahead of his own personal interest and the interests of the Conservative Party. It's time that the Conservative leader step up to the plate and get the security clearance that's needed, Mr. Speaker, in dealing with foreign interference. What is he hiding, Mr. Speaker? He needs to be transparent. He has to tell us about his past. There's something there he needs to tell Canadians, Mr. Speaker.
Oh my goodness, he's sounding like a conspiracy theorist. Maybe he's a far-right extremist.
The Honourable Member from Parliamentary.
What an insult that is to Canadians who are going hungry.
Yeah.
And that's not only that, but it's Veterans Week, and there's far too many of the heroes who bravely served Canada who now cannot count on sitting down to their next meal. Right. In fact, food insecurity amongst veterans has gotten so bad due to the NDP Liberal carbon tax that some legions are having to divert the funds from their poppy campaigns to instead help keep the local food banks afloat. So when will the Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so common sense Conservatives can ensure that veterans finally get the respect that they deserve?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, let me tell you what an insult is. When you have the Leader of the Conservative Party continuing to focus his attention on his personal interests and the interests of the Conservative Party, Mr. Speaker. Let's be clear. The Leader of the Conservative Party is hiding something. There's something about his past that he does not want Canadians to know. Mr. Speaker, there is an obligation for the Leader of the Conservative Party to come clean and tell Canadians what it is that he's hiding. Why won't he get that security clearance?
That was an insult to my ears. My goodness, please breathe.
Order.
They get so worked up, they get so incredibly angry, they just can't stay composed.
Order.
The Liberals, man, they're crazy. You're deranged.
The honourable member from Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, costs are up, crime is up, and time is up. Moose Jaw's Food Bank faced a temporary closure due to rising costs of food and lack of donations this summer. It used to be people facing temporary hardship were the ones that used the food bank. Now, it's people with good jobs being forced to use the food bank because the cost of everything has gone up. Mr. Speaker, when will this Prime Minister call a carbon tax election so people can put something under the tree and on their table this Christmas?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Innovation.
Well, I'm glad to hear the member opposite use the word security again. You know, what this House should be preoccupied with, and that all Canadians are preoccupied with is the overwhelming question that they can't answer as to why the Conservative leader will not get his security clearance. It's been months and months and months. This House has been preoccupied with foreign interference, and yet the Conservative leader won't step up and do the very basic thing that all other party leaders in this House have done, which is to get a security clearance and protect the country.
But you as a government have failed to protect the country because all of this foreign interference has happened under you guys. You've allowed this to happen.
Coquitlam Port, Coquitlam.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, our kids need help. The internet is not a safe place for them right now. We need to hold online platforms accountable and put the safety of our children first by passing the Online Harms Act. Unfortunately, we can't debate this bill because all business in the House is stalled in a Conservative delay tactic. Amanda Todd's mother, Carol, one of my constituents, recently spoke to the Globe and Mail calling for us to debate and pass Bill C-63. Can the Minister of Justice and Attorney General explain why parents across the country, including Carol, are urging us to pass the online...
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank Carol Todd for her courage. Carol's daughter, Amanda, tragically died by suicide 12 years ago after being victimized online. Now Carol is calling on every parliamentarian to take action and pass the Online Harms Act. To quote Carol, she said, "The filibuster that is happening right now and holding everything up is frustrating. It's just wasting time. I've waited 12 years for this. Conservatives have shown they will not prioritize children or protecting them. But I put it to the Bloc and the NDP that they have the power right now to stop this filibuster, protect kids, and pass this bill. Will they?"
The Honourable Member from Thornhill.
Two hardened criminals, a stolen car, and a police chase. It's not the plot of a blockbuster movie, it's daily life in Canada after 9 years of this Prime Minister. This weekend, the Toronto police officers tried to arrest two car thieves. But not before the crooks injured a horse, rammed a bunch of vehicles, destroyed a business, and put innocent shoppers in danger. We know that both offenders were out on bail thanks to the Liberal NDP catch and release policy that has made this country more dangerous for victims and more lenient for criminals. So why was this government putting police and the public at risk instead of putting criminals in jail where they belong?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
That member talks a big game, but when it comes to GTA politics, let's actually assess what police officers are saying. The Deputy Chief of Police in York Region has said, if you actually want to get tough on bail, you need to support the courts, the crowns, and fix the detention centers. Guess who has jurisdiction over all of that? The member from Thornhill should know that's the province. You want to get tough on dealing with bail? Let's have the province support criminal justice in this country and keep our communities safe.
No, members are very passionate about many issues. I'm going to ask the member from Kamloops, Thompson.
So he wants to talk about listening to the police. This is a statement from the Toronto Police Association themselves saying that a 45% increase in shootings have happened, a 62% increase in gun-related homicides have happened this time to last year. And this is acting on the handgun ban that Trudeau wanted to put. So no, I don't think the Liberal government is listening to the police when they do say these things. They lie, they manipulate, they are slimy, and they are doing it right in front of everybody. And this just proves it. They aren't listening to their own police associations.
responds with that, whatever that was. His recklessness is turning criminals out onto the streets and putting the public at risk. Why is he the only one that doesn't see it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
Let's listen to police officers. Here's the Deputy Chief of York Region. There's
Hey, here he goes
not
again.
simply enough court space to hold contested bail hearings. Let's listen to the National Police Federation, who pointed out, newsflash, that when you have JPs with no legal training, sometimes there may be some issues with their rendering of decisions and keeping our community safe. Where do they train JPs legally before they appoint them? Nova Scotia. Maybe that's a lesson that Doug Ford could take. If she needs it in a three-word slogan, here it is. Talk to the Premier.
And he's angry because he knows he's wrong. He knows he's failed. The police have exposed Trudeau's handgun ban. And he's getting upset now because he knows he's wrong. That's why he's acting like this.
The honourable member for Charlebourg, Haute-Saint-Charles. Philippe Léger in the Journal de Montréal said that police's concerns about gangs in Montreal is scary. The Montreal Police Service says that Montreal is becoming like Marseille in France, a place where the authorities are losing control. Mr. Léger said that if the criminal world has changed, our laws need to change as well, starting with mandatory minimum sentences for all criminals who are recruiting young people to commit crimes. Does the Prime Minister agree, or will he continue to stand with criminals? The Honourable Minister of Public Safety. Mr. Speaker, we will continue to work with police organizations. My colleague mentioned the police force in Montreal. We regularly have discussions with the chief. I spoke with him as recently as last week. We are supporting the important work that they're doing. We're also supporting the important work of the RCMP and the Border Services Agency, who have a role to play in supporting municipal and provincial police forces. This is work that we are doing. This is work that the Conservatives forgot to do, and they cut those organizations. The Honourable Member for Alfred Pellant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 1 million Canadians have already received dental care thanks to the Canada Dental Plan that our government has put in place. This is a historic investment which will benefit Canadians, but the Conservative members voted day after day against this program, which is benefiting Canadians and Quebecers. And they keep saying that the program doesn't exist and that they have the intention to cut it. Can the Minister of Fisheries please explain how this program is helping Quebecers get the dental care that they need? The Honourable Minister of Fisheries and Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over 1 million Canadians, including 325,000 Quebecers, have already received care under our dental care program. The Conservatives are playing games with the health of Canadians and Canadian seniors by offering nothing more than slogans and cuts to the programs that they need. Canadians and Quebecers deserve a government that cares about health care. On our side of the House, we know that the Conservatives only want to make cuts, no matter how many seniors will be affected by that. What's the Conservatives' hidden agenda, Mr. Speaker?
Oh, Quebecers. It's always about the Quebecers, isn't it?
Member from Hamilton Centre.
This morning, the BC Maritime Employers Association imposed a bad faith lockout on over 700 ILW Local 514 workers at BC ports. This blatant attempt to manipulate this Liberal government into undermining workers' rights is an outrageous assault on free collective bargaining. So, will this Liberal minister categorically reject any intervention that would force these port workers to give up their collective bargaining rights, or will he bow to the employer?
Yes. Honourable Minister of Labour and for Seniors.
Mr. Speaker, I spoke with the BC MEA and the ILWU on the weekend and reminded them that it is their responsibility to their members and to each other, to Canadians, to farmers, to workers, to businesses, to get a deal. It is their responsibility, and they need to do the work necessary to get an agreement.
The Honourable Member from Kitchener Centre.
Mr. Speaker, keeping track of the tens of billions this government gives to big oil's gamble on carbon capture, it's near impossible. Yet for proven solutions like public transit, no new funds till after the next election, a fraction of what carbon capture gets, and transit operations won't even be eligible. We could add $4 billion for public transit tomorrow by taxing the excess profits of the oil and gas industry. So when will this government put in place an excess profits on that of the oil and gas industry and put it towards reducing fares and improving service on public transit?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment and Climate Change.
Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable colleague for his question. First, the federal government is investing historic amounts in public transit, Mr. Speaker, $30 billion. There are more than 400 kilometres of subway lines being built in Canada right now because of federal investment. Second, we're the only country in the G20. No other country in the G20 has phased out subsidies to fossil fuels. We're the only ones that have done that, despite a commitment made under the previous government to do that, on which they did absolutely nothing, Mr. Speaker. We're there to help Canadians with transit, but we're also there to fight
I heard
climate
that
change.
comment. They are not messing around today.
Je voudrais signaler.
I'd like to.
Uh-oh.
Order, please.
Uh-oh.
I'd like to point out to members that present in the gallery is Ian Lafrenière, Minister responsible for relations with First Nations and Inuit for the province of Quebec.
Colleagues,
following
please. Discussions among representatives of all parties in the House. Colleagues, your
Greg's
attention,
laying the
please.
smackdown.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand that there is an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of the Honourable Murray Sinclair. À la suite des discussions.
Following discussions among representatives of all parties in the House, I understand there's an agreement to observe a moment of silence in memory of the Honourable Murray Sinclair. I now invite all honourable members to rise.
Okay, I had to do a Google search here to figure out who Murray Sinclair was. I had no idea. Here's Trudeau's itinerary for the day he's going to receive a flu shot. He is going to go take some photos. He's going to meet with some UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, or whoever. He's going to do some more photo shoots because, you know, Trudeau. He's going to deliver some remarks at a Diwali celebration with some more photo shoots and open media coverage.
Thank all honourable members.
And then he is going to talk to Volodymyr Zelensky, probably about Russia.
I'd like to inform members that the volume of earpieces will now be lowered.
The volume of the earpieces will now be reset.
Okay. I believe we'll probably get back into House of Commons proceedings here, or if there are any statements by members, but I think we did that before question period. Let's see what Greg has to say. Big Bad Greg.
Affaires courantes ordinaires.
Daily routine of business.
Oh, and we're going back to tabling documents.
Tabling of documents. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. To the Government House Leader.
See, Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 36, bracket 8A, I have the honour to table in both official languages the government's responses to 15 petitions. These returns will be tabled in an electronic format.
And saying, I want to
Dépôt de documents.
Tabling of documents.
All right, well, if it's just going to be tabling documents, I'm just going... Oh, wait, statements by ministers? Perhaps?
Or the Honourable
No,
Parliamentary...
it's just routine. All right, I'm just going to end it here. Hopefully, everybody is going to have a fantastic rest of your day or night, depending on where you are from. I will be live for question period tomorrow. That is going to do it for me. Thank you very much for joining. Trudeau, doing photo shoots, talking to UN ministers, doing some more photo shoots, talking to Vladimir Zelensky, going to celebrations. Pretty typical stuff for Trudeau. Not actually doing real work. But I guess we'll see if he shows up tomorrow. Probably not. Don't get your hopes up. Anyway, on that note, I will talk to you all tomorrow. Thank you all for joining. Have a great rest of your day or night.